Hi guys. Some doors in history were never meant to be opened. Tonight, we're kicking down 33 of them to expose the ancient cover-ups and shocking secrets powerful people tried to bury forever. Let's start. Echoes in empty courtyards, the civilization that chose silence. The night wind over the Indus River plain is a slow, whispering breath. It moves through the empty streets of Mohenjo-Daro, not as a visitor, but as a permanent resident, sweeping fine, ancient dust from meticulously laid brick lanes into silent courtyards. Here, around 2600 BCE, arose one of the world's first and most startlingly modern urban experiments. The city was a marvel of civil planning, a grid of streets with advanced drainage, uniform baked brick houses, and grand public baths like the Great Bath. But as we walk these ruins in our mind's eye, a profound and unsettling absence makes itself known. There are no towering palaces, no gargantuan temples. Power, it seems, was woven into the social fabric itself, a consensus so complete it left no monumental signature. And then, around 1900 BCE, that consensus simply unraveled. The people of Mohenjo-Daro and their sister city Harappa did not fall to a dramatic, fiery end. Archaeologists have found no evidence of mass violence, no layers of ash from a great conflagration. The story is written in subtler signs. Wells were filled in with care. Smaller neighborhoods began to encroach upon the wide main streets. And then, over generations, the cities were gently, thoroughly, and deliberately emptied. It was not a flight, it was a departure. They took their belongings and walked away, leaving the wind to claim what remained. Mainstream scholarship points to environmental factors, a shifting course of the mighty Indus River, or changes in monsoon patterns that may have slowly strangled the agricultural heartland. Yet, the eerie lack of conflict gives one pause. It feels less like a catastrophe and more like a decision, a single, unified, cultural choice to dissolve. Scholars still debate whether this represents a failed adaptation to climate change or the peaceful, conscious dissolution of a social experiment that had run its course. There is a quirky, fringe detail that haunts this mystery. Among the few art objects found are small, soapstone seals, often depicting a mysterious, horned figure, sometimes called the Pashupati. But on other seals, there are strange, spoked wheel symbols. Some unconventional researchers have pointed out that these bear a striking, if simplistic, resemblance to mandalas or chakras, symbols of spiritual energy and cosmic order. Could the societal unity of these people have been maintained not by force, but by a shared, internalized spiritual discipline? A discipline that, when the external world became untenable, allowed them to simply let go of the physical form of their civilization, taking the true core of their knowledge with them into the hinterlands. The silence of Mohenjo-Daro is not the silence of ruin. It is the silence of a question asked and then left hanging in the dry air. They left us their impeccable plumbing and their standardized weights, but they took the secret of their unity and the secret of their peaceful dissolution with them. They did not burn their library. They simply closed the book, leaving us to wander its empty pages, listening for echoes in courtyards where the only sound is the wind, patiently sweeping, forever sweeping, as if trying to clear a space for an answer that will never come. And as that wind dies down on the Indus plain, another, far colder breeze begins to stir, carrying with it the scent of thawing peat and ancient pine, and the slow, creaking groan of something long frozen beginning to move. Maps drawn in starlight and memory, navigation before the North Star. That colder breeze gives way to the salt tang of an endless, star-dusted ocean. We are far from any land, in the vast heart of the Pacific, aboard a Wa'akaulua, a double-hulled voyaging canoe. There is no compass, no sextant, no chart. The horizon is a perfect, unbroken circle. Yet, the navigator, the PWO, is not lost. He is reading. He reads the ocean itself. The specific pattern of swells bending around distant, unseen islands. The flight path of the Manuoku, white tern, at dusk, which always returns to land. He reads the stars not as fixed points, but as moving guides, knowing that Hokulea Arcturus passes directly over Hawaii, and that the rising of Matariki, Pleiades, marks the season for planting. This is non-instrument wayfinding, a living map written in the rhythms of nature, memorized across generations in chants and kinesthetic knowledge. It is a system so sophisticated it allowed the Polynesian peoples to discover and settle the last habitable corners of the earth, a feat of exploration unmatched in human history. But this mastery presents its own profound cover-up, the deliberate erasure, by later colonial forces, of this genius, dismissing it as luck or primitive instinct. The mainstream historical fact is one of breathtaking achievement. Using only these methods, Polynesians navigated across millions of square miles of open ocean, finding specks of land like Rapa Nui, Easter Island, Hawaii, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. This was not accidental drift, but intentional, two-way voyaging. The narrative of primitive peoples accidentally stumbling upon islands was a colonial fiction, a cover-up of intellectual capacity born from an inability to comprehend a knowledge system that did not rely on written texts or instruments. The true story is one of meticulous observation and grand, intentional strategy. Yet, within this recovered wisdom lies a quirkier mystery. The PWO speak of deeper, more subtle signs. The feel of the canoe as it catches a reflected swell from an island still below the horizon, a phenomenon known as tilapa, underwater lightning, flashes of light in the deep that point toward land. They also speak of kino, a embodied knowing, a state of mind where the navigator merges with the canoe, the sea, and the stars, perceiving course not intellectually, but intuitively. This transcends simple environmental observation and enters the realm of heightened, trained perception. Some traditional chants even reference the roads of the ancestors, invisible pathways across the sea that are followed by memory and spirit as much as by swell and star. Scholars still debate the extent to which this system could be reliably taught and executed over voyages of thousands of miles, and whether some knowledge, like precise star courses for specific island pairs, was held as sacred, secret knowledge by navigator guilds, creating a controlled hierarchy of information. The cover-up here might have been internal, a protective measure to safeguard the most vital celestial roadmaps from being diluted or misused. This leads to a fringe, almost metaphysical interpretation. Some researchers of ancient cosmologies suggest that the Polynesian navigational system implies an understanding of the world not as a static globe, but as a living, reciprocal relationship. The canoe does not simply move across the ocean, it participates in a dialogue with it. The success of the voyage depended as much on ritual purity, correct protocol, and ancestral permission as on technical skill. In this view, the colonial cover-up was doubly damaging. It not only denied the technical prowess, but also severed the spiritual and philosophical framework that made the prowess possible. The maps weren't just in the stars, they were in the relationship between the people, their ancestors, and the cosmos. So, the great cover-up of the Pacific is not of a place, but of a process. It was the dismissal of an entire epistemology, a way of knowing that saw the world as a web of meaningful signs. The voyagers were not just sailing to something, they were navigating a conversation with the universe. As we noted with the silent cities of the Indus, some truths are kept not by being buried, but by being rendered invisible to those who lack the code. The star paths were there for anyone to see, but only the initiated could read them. This knowledge was almost erased, not by being burned like the Library of Alexandria, but by being rendered illegible to the conqueror's eye, forced into the realm of myth, until the modern revival of voyaging proved it was always, profoundly, science. And as we lower our gaze from the infinite starfields of the Pacific, we turn it towards a different, denser canopy, a green, tangled, living library where the knowledge is not written on parchment or spoken in chants, but encoded in the very roots and leaves of the forest itself. The library that was a forest, knowledge written in living roots. That dense canopy closes over us, a world of dappled green light, humid air thick with the scent of loam and blooming life. This is the Amazon, long portrayed as a pristine wilderness, a vast, untouched jungle. But that idea is itself a cover-up, a narrative woven by early explorers who could not see the garden for the trees. Emerging evidence from archaeology, anthropology, and botany suggests a revolutionary truth. Much of the Amazon is not wild. It is a legacy forest, a vast, cultivated library of plants, engineered over millennia by sophisticated civilizations that managed the landscape on a continental scale. They left no stone ziggurats, but they built a living, breathing testament in wood, leaf, and fruit, a library whose books are trees, whose language is biodiversity. The mainstream fact is rooted in terra preta Amazonian dark earth. These are patches of incredibly fertile human-made soil found scattered across the basin. They are not natural. They are the result of centuries of deliberate soil enrichment by pre-Columbian peoples through charcoal, compost, and waste. Where terra preta is found, so too is evidence of large, settled communities. Furthermore, the forest itself shows a startling pattern: hyperdominance of useful species. The Brazil nut, the cocoa tree, the acai palm, and hundreds of others are found in abundances far beyond what random chance would allow. They were planted, tended, and selected for. The Amazon, we now understand, is in large part an orchard, a pharmacy, and a timber yard on a gargantuan scale, managed by peoples who understood their environment with a depth we are only beginning to grasp. But within this living library is a quirkier, more enigmatic detail. Certain tree species, crucial for food or medicine, are found hundreds of miles outside their natural reproductive range. Some researchers posit that this was not just accidental spread via trade, but a form of deliberate, long-term botanical planning, a sacred geography where specific trees were planted along routes or near settlements as living waymarkers and resource depots. The distribution maps of these species become a ghostly map of forgotten trade routes and cultural spheres. The forest floor itself, with its complex mosaics of different ecological zones created by ancient burning and planting, is a text waiting to be read, a landscape grammar we have only just learned to see. Scholars still debate the scale and population density of these pre-Columbian Amazonian societies. Were they a continuous, networked civilization, or a patchwork of independent but culturally linked chiefdoms who shared a similar land management ethos? The cover-up was catastrophic and biological. The arrival of European diseases, which raced ahead of the explorers themselves, decimated up to 95% of the population. The gardeners died, and the garden, left untended, grew wild. The jungle literally covered their tracks, swallowing their villages and fields, creating the illusion of emptiness. The greatest cover-up in the Americas was performed not by human hands, but by vines and fast-growing secondary forest, abetted by plague. This leads to a fringe, profound speculation. What if the library was not just metaphorical? Indigenous knowledge systems in the Amazon today are orally transmitted, but they are also ecologically encoded. A shaman doesn't just memorize a list of plants. He knows their relationships, their habitats, their seasonal behaviors. The forest itself is the database. The loss of the people who designed this system meant the loss of the user manual, but the system, the library, still stands. Some researchers, working with indigenous tribes, believe that certain non-random arrangements of trees, lianas, and fungi represent not just resource management, but a form of living, three-dimensional writing, a code of relationships that tells stories of ancestry, lore, and cosmology. The cover-up is so perfect because the medium is alive and constantly changing. The message is dynamic, not static. So, the Amazon whispers a secret of a different kind of monument. As we noted with the Polynesian star paths, true knowledge can be embedded in the world itself. Here, it is embedded in life. The civilization that shaped this forest covered its tracks by making its greatest work indistinguishable from nature. They built not to last for centuries in stone, but to evolve for millennia in cellulose and chlorophyll. Their legacy is not a ruined city, but a thriving, complex biome that continues to feed and heal millions. They hid their civilization in plain sight, in the green veil of the world's largest rainforest, proving that the most enduring library might have no walls at all, only a canopy that forever reaches for the light, holding its stories in every branch and root. And from this vibrant, living archive, we are drawn to a scene of stark contrast, a darkened hall, not of growth, but of consumption, where a feast is being held not to celebrate life, but to deliberately erase a memory from the world. Feast of the Forgotten Kings. Banquets where history was erased. The hall is dark, lit by the guttering light of oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on frescoed walls. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat, rare spices, and wine. This is no ordinary celebration. This is a funerary feast in a late Bronze Age Mycenaean palace. perhaps at Pylos or Mycenae itself, around 1200 BCE. The guests recline, partaking in a final, magnificent meal. But as they consume the delicacies, the boar, the fish, the fine grains, they are participating in something far more profound than a memorial. They are enacting a ritual of uncreation. They are consuming the identity, the legacy, and the very memory of the king who lies dead. This feast is the engine of a deliberate cover-up, where the community, through a shared, sacred act of eating, digests and dissolves a ruler's place in history. The mainstream archaeological evidence for such practices is indirect but compelling. In the ruins of these Mycenaean palaces, we find the remains of massive, one-time feasts, animal bones from hundreds of cattle, sheep, and pigs, alongside shattered fineware drinking vessels, kylikes. These are not the middens of daily life, but deposits of a single, catastrophic consumption event, often associated with the destruction of the palace itself or the burial of a ruler. The Linear B tablets, the administrative records of these palaces, suddenly cease. It is a clean break. The feast appears to be the final act of the palace bureaucracy, a ritualized closing of the ledger. The king is not just buried. His entire economic and political entity is ceremonially terminated with the feast as its closing ceremony. But the quirkier, more chilling detail lies in the potential menu and the symbology of the act. Analysis of residue in specific ceremonial cups from such contexts has revealed traces of not just wine, but also psychoactive compounds, possibly from opium or certain herbs. This suggests the feast was not merely a somber dinner, but an altered state of consciousness, a collective ritual meant to blur the lines between the mundane and the sacred, the past and the present. The consumption of the king's stored wealth, his livestock, his wine, his grain, was more than redistribution. It was the literal metabolizing of his power by his people. By eating the fruits of his reign, they took his manna, his authority, back into the body politic, rendering his dynasty void. The feast was a transaction where the currency was memory. Scholars still debate whether these destruction feasts were acts of renewal, a sacred burning of the old to make way for the new, or acts of violent rejection, a communal revolt against a failing ruler or a collapsing system, disguised as a funeral rite. Did the guests willingly participate in erasing their own history to survive a changing world, or was it a forced act of compliance by a new, rising power, eliminating the past? The cover-up is so total because it was participatory. The entire community became accomplices in the forgetting, their full bellies the proof of their complicity. This leads to the most fringe and psychological interpretation. Some researchers of ritual theory suggest these feasts were a form of traumatic surgery on the social body. The king was not just a man, he was the axis mundi, the linchpin connecting the people to the gods and the cosmic order. His death, especially if sudden or disastrous, could cause a catastrophic rupture in reality itself. The feast, then, was an emergency procedure. By consuming his worldly substance in a controlled, ritual frenzy, the community severed its psychic and spiritual ties to him, cauterizing the wound of his loss. They ate him to forget him, to stop the bleeding of meaning from their world. The cover-up was therapeutic, a terrible medicine for collective trauma. The palace was burned or abandoned, not out of anger, but as a surgical removal of the infected site. So, the Feast of the Forgotten Kings reveals a cover-up that is intimate, communal, and visceral. It is not a secret kept by a few, but a forgetting enacted by all. As we noted with the living library of the Amazon, knowledge can be held in life. Here we see its inverse. History can be dissolved in consumption. They buried no treasure with this king. They ate it. They left no grand epitaph. They shattered the cups that held the toast to his memory. The final act of his reign was a banquet where his story was the main course, and his people, the willing diners, left no crumbs behind, and from the smoky, psychotropic darkness of that ancient hall, we are pulled to a scene of blinding light and dizzying height, to a bridge woven not from stone but from grass and faith, spanning a chasm that reason says is impossible to cross. Bridges of spider, silk, and faith, connections across impossible divides. The light is blinding, the air thin and cold. We stand at the edge of a gorge in the high Andes, where the wind screams like a lost spirit. Below, a river churns white water over rocks hundreds of feet down. To cross here is to court death. Yet, for the Inca and their predecessors, it was a necessity. Their empire, Tawantinsuyu, was a vertical realm of mountains and deep valleys, and its cohesion depended on connection. So, they built bridges, but not of stone and mortar. They built Keswachaka suspension bridges, woven from nothing more than ichu grass, hand-twisted into ropes as thick as a man's torso. Every year, the communities from 4 local villages gather in a days-long ritual to renew it, weaving the new bridge over the skeleton of the old, chanting, praying, working in unison. The bridge is more than a tool. It is a covenant, a living expression of Aini reciprocity. Its strongest cable is not fiber, but the shared belief in the community's ability to create the impossible. The mainstream historical and engineering fact is astonishing. The Inca network included perhaps 200 such major grass bridges, with the greatest spanning over 45 meters. Spanish conquistadors, no strangers to Roman arches, wrote with terrified awe of crossing these swaying, creaking spans that seemed conjured from air. The construction technique, passed down orally and kinesthetically, involves braiding small cords into larger ropes, weaving the floor and handrails, and anchoring the whole structure to stone abutments. It is a masterpiece of tensile engineering, understanding the strength of bundled fibers and the dynamics of a catenary curve centuries before such calculations existed in the West. Yet, with the fall of the empire and the disruption of communal life, the knowledge and the will to maintain most of these bridges faded. They were not destroyed. They were simply allowed to return to the earth, their utility erased by colonial neglect. But within this tradition lies a quirkier spiritual mystery. The renewal of the Keswachaka is not an engineering maintenance project. It is a minka, a communal work undertaken as a sacred duty to Pachamama, Mother Earth, and the Apus, mountain spirits. The master weaver, the Chakaruwak, is both engineer and priest. Before a single cord is twisted, offerings of coca leaves and chicha are made. The act of weaving is a prayer. The belief is absolute. If the rituals are not performed correctly, if the community is not in harmony, the bridge will fail. This intertwining of practical skill and sacred obligation suggests that the bridge's physical integrity was seen as directly dependent on its spiritual integrity. The knowledge was not just how to build, but why to build, and for whom: the living, the ancestors, and the gods of the landscape. Scholars still debate whether the annual renewal was purely a practical response to the biodegradable materials, a profound ritualization of necessity, or a deliberate social technology to reinforce communal bonds and Inca imperial control by mandating collective labor. The cover-up, in a sense, was performed by history itself. The Spanish, focused on gold and souls, saw only a primitive, if terrifying tool, missing the deeper social and cosmological structure that the bridge represented. They documented the how, but were blind to the why, allowing the true meaning to fray and vanish like an unmaintained rope, leaving only the skeletal fact of the engineering behind. This leads to a fringe, metaphysical interpretation. What if the bridge was understood not as crossing a chasm, but as healing a tear in the sacred landscape? In the Andean worldview, rivers and deep gorges are powerful, often dangerous, spiritual entities. A bridge is a pact, a respectful request for passage. The woven grass, a product of the earth, becomes a mediator. The act of communal weaving literally ties the fragmented sides of the community and the cosmos back together. In this view, the bridge is not a thing, but an event, a recurring ceremony that maintains the cosmic order. Its annual dissolution and rebirth mirror the cycles of nature and time. The real cover-up would be our modern, purely functional view of it, which severs it from this animistic reality, turning a living ritual into a static, ethnographic curiosity. So, the bridges of spider silk and faith teach us that some cover-ups are not of facts, but of contexts. The fact of the bridge's existence is a wonder, but the context, the belief that made it possible, the ritual that sustained it, is the deeper secret. As we saw with the Feast of the Forgotten Kings, reality can be shaped by communal will. Here, physics is bent by communal faith and skill. The chasm is real, the fall is fatal, but the bridge is a testament to a truth that lies beyond material, that a people united by a shared story and a sacred purpose can weave a path across any abyss. And as we step off that swaying, living span onto solid ground, we become aware of a new rhythm, not of the heart or the wind, but of something more constant, the slow, patient measure of time itself, kept not by gears, but by the pulse of the world. Clocks that measured heartbeats, timekeeping in a world without hours. The rhythm here is not a tick or a tock, but a drip, a steady, the solitary plink of water falling into a pool in a dark, sacred cave. Or it is the soft, sighing hiss of a calibrated rope, slowly burning from one knot to the next. Or it is the synchronized breath of monks chanting in a pre-dawn chapel. Before the mechanical escapement, before the sundial's shadow, time was not a grid of hours and minutes imposed upon the world. It was a melody woven from its rhythms, a lived experience measured in heartbeats, breaths, and celestial breaths. This was timekeeping as intimacy, a cover-up of the modern notion of time as a universal, indifferent constant. In the ancient world, time was personal, local, and deeply sacred. The mainstream historical record shows a fascinating diversity in pre-modern timekeeping. The water clock, or clepsydra, used in ancient Greece and China, measured intervals by the regulated flow of liquid. Incense clocks in China and Japan marked time through the slow, fragrant burn of pressed powder along a groove. Candle clocks, with measured rings, burned through the night in medieval Europe. These were not for coordinating train schedules, but for timing speeches, night watches, monastic prayers, or alchemical processes. They measured duration, not absolute time. The hour was often seasonal, longer in summer, shorter in winter, a flexible unit that bent to the sun's will, not the other way around. The standardization of time was a later violence, a cover-up of time's inherent fluidity. But within these methods lies a quirkier, more philosophical mystery. Many of these clocks were not merely utilitarian, they were cosmological models. A Chinese incense clock might be shaped like a labyrinth, its burning path representing the journey of the soul. The dripping water clock echoed the cyclical nature of rainfall, rivers, and bodily humours. The steady chant in a monastery was meant to align human rhythm with the divine order, the music of the spheres. Timekeeping was an act of participation in the cosmos, a way to harmonize the small, human pulse with the great pulse of existence. To measure time was to touch the sacred machinery of the world. Scholars still debate whether the development of precise mechanical clocks in the late Middle Ages liberated humanity from natural cycles or enslaved it to an artificial, unforgiving metric. The cover-up was profound. The gradual replacement of cyclical, qualitative time, time of seasons, rituals, and organic growth with linear, quantitative time, time of commerce, industry, and progress. The heartbeat clock was internalized, personal, and forgiving. The gear clock was external, impersonal, and demanding. One asked for harmony, the other demanded synchronization. This leads to a fringe, almost mystical interpretation of the oldest clocks. Consider the geoglyphs of Nazca, vast lines on the Peruvian desert visible only from the sky. Some researchers, beyond the common astronomical alignment theories, propose they were not meant to point at celestial events, but to interact with them over vast timescales. The lines, walked in ritual procession, could have been a form of terrestrial timekeeping, where the landscape itself was a clock face and human movement was the hand. Or consider the acoustically resonant chambers in certain Neolithic tombs, like Newgrange in Ireland. The specific reverberation time within these spaces, the duration a chant or a struck note would hang in the air, might have been a calibrated experience of sacred time, a measured moment of contact with the ancestors, built into the very stone. These were clocks that measured not minutes, but moments of eternity. So, the clocks that measured heartbeats reveal a covered-up dimension of reality, time as a quality, not a quantity. As we noted with the woven bridges, the ancient world often sought harmony with natural forces, not domination over them. The drip of water, the burn of a cord, the chant of a prayer. These were not primitive attempts to capture time, but sophisticated conversations with it. They acknowledged time as a river one flows with, not a resource one mines. The great cover-up was the invention of clock time, which severed this intimate connection, walling us off from the rhythmic world and locking us in the ticking prison of the now, making us forget that time could ever have been measured by anything as simple and as profound as a heartbeat. And from this contemplative space of measured breaths and dripping water, our narrative is swept up by a wilder, more desperate story, a legend not of harmony, but of flight, not of a community building a bridge, but of an entire city attempting the ultimate escape, not over land or water, but by transforming itself into a vessel and sailing into the realm of myth, the city that sailed away, metropolis on a journey without return. The legend is etched in fragments, found in the works of Greek historians, and echoed in the folklore of the Levantine coast. It speaks of a magnificent Phoenician city, a peer of Tyre and Sidon, famed for its purple dye, its sailors, and its pride. Its name varies, perhaps it was Tantura, or a memory of a pre-Tyrian settlement. Facing an unstoppable cataclysm, an invading army of unimaginable force, or perhaps a divine wrath foretold by oracles, the city did not surrender, nor did its people flee in scattered ships. Instead, they performed an act of collective engineering so audacious it borders on alchemy. They convinced their very city to leave. Using their unparalleled nautical genius, they allegedly transformed their stone foundations, their temples, their very streets, into a vast, interconnected fleet. The city untethered itself from the land and sailed, en masse, into the sunset of history, leaving behind only an empty harbour and a story too incredible to be believed, yet too persistent to be forgotten. The mainstream historical lens views this as pure attiton, a mythic story invented to explain why a once great city site lay empty. Archaeologists point to real cities like Tyre, which was built on an island and had a formidable fleet, or to the gradual silting of harbours and shifts in trade routes that could lead to a city's abandonment, which might later be romanticised into a tale of miraculous escape. The Phoenicians were the greatest sailors of the ancient world. It is logical that their legends would take to the sea. The cover-up, in this view, is natural. The mundane processes of economic decline and geological change were covered over by a far more glorious and mysterious narrative. But within the legend lies a quirkier, tantalizing archaeological possibility. Recent underwater surveys along the Mediterranean coast have revealed numerous anchorages and submerged structures in places where no major city is known. Some of these are in deep water, suggesting not a sunken city, but a purpose-built offshore maritime infrastructure. Could the legend preserve a distorted memory of a truly unique urban form, a city that was fundamentally amphibious? Not a city that sailed away whole, but one whose identity was so bound to its ships and floating docks that its population, in the face of crisis, could simply abandon its land-based edifices and take to the sea as a polity, relocating their entire commercial and social network to a new shore, leaving the old stone husk behind. This would be a logistical, not a magical, miracle. Scholars still debate whether such legends are nostalgic fictions from a later age, symbolic tales about the wandering nature of Phoenician culture and trade, or garbled accounts of actual, large-scale maritime evacuations, perhaps from the coastal devastation caused by the late Bronze Age collapse or the invasions of the Sea Peoples. The city that sailed might have been its people, their archives, their sacred idols, and their portable wealth embarking together in a coordinated armada, a floating city of ships that then founded a new colony elsewhere, its origin story becoming mythologized over centuries. This leads to the most haunting fringe speculation, which connects to the realm of sacred geography. In several ancient cultures, the city was not just a place, but a living entity with a spirit and a destiny. What if the ritual act of sailing the city away was not physical but ritual? Faced with conquest, the priests and people may have performed an elaborate ceremony of deconsecration. They would have symbolically loaded the city's tutelary deity onto a sacred ship, transferred the city's essence, genius loci, into a portable idol or a container of sacred fire, and then sailed that vessel away to a secret destination, ritually moving the city's soul while leaving its empty body for the conquerors. The physical city was abandoned, but its spiritual continuity, its true self, was saved. The cover-up was spiritual. They hid the city's soul, letting its corpse tell a false story of disappearance. So, the city that sailed away is a testament to the power of narrative as a lifeboat. When physical reality becomes untenable, a people can salvage their identity in a story. As we saw with the clocks of heartbeat and water, ancient understanding often privileged the qualitative over the quantitative. Here, the qualitative identity of the city was preserved, even if its quantitative, stone reality was lost. The legend covers up the probable truth of a traumatic abandonment, but in doing so, it performs a deeper magic. It grants the city immortality. It is no longer a ruined foundation, it is a perpetual voyage. And as we watch that ghostly fleet vanish into the western haze, we are drawn to a quieter, more sinister place of cultivation. A walled garden where the plants grown are not for nourishment, but for the alteration of the mind itself. Gardens of poison and revelation. Botany as weapon and wisdom. The air inside the walled garden is still, heavy with a cloying, sweet fragrance that carries an undertone of decay. This is no orchard or vegetable plot. Here, under the watchful eye of a royal botanist priest, grow rows of elegant, bell-shaped flowers of foxglove, the sinister, glossy berries of deadly nightshade, the seductive, sap-oozing pods of the opium poppy. This is the pharmacopoeia, a garden of agents, where the line between poison, medicine, and sacrament is not just blurred, but deliberately cultivated. In the ancient world, from the court physicians of Assyria to the oracle priests of Delphi, control over these plants was a form of high statecraft, a covered-up science of consciousness that could heal a king, doom a rival, or open a gateway to the gods. The mainstream historical fact is one of deep empirical knowledge. The Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, ca. 1550 BCE, details the use of opium for pain and cannabis for inflammation. The Greek rhizotomoi, root cutters, were renowned for their understanding of plant properties. This knowledge was practical and powerful. Henbane was used as an anesthetic, mandrake as a soporific, and ergot-infused rye might have played a role in the mystical Eleusinian mysteries. The cover-up began later, with the rise of monolithic religions and centralized medicine, which often demonized this shamanic, female-coded, and ecstatic plant knowledge as witchcraft or heresy, driving it underground. The garden was physically destroyed or forgotten, its secrets kept alive only in coded herbals and folk tradition. But within this historical reality grows a quirkier, more deliberate mystery. Certain plants were not just for healing or harming the body, but for engineering specific states of the mind and soul. The Oracle of Delphi is famously speculated to have been influenced by ethylene or other gases rising from a fissure, but some theories suggest a more botanical component, a sacred brew containing laurel, associated with Apollo, or other psychoactives that induced the prophetic trance. In the Vedic Soma ritual, or the mysterious Greek kykeon, the precise plant or fungus used was a closely guarded secret, the very identity of which was a state secret. To know the plant was to hold the key to the door of perception, a key too dangerous to be duplicated. Scholars still debate the extent to which these psychoactive sacraments were the genuine engine behind religious experience and mystical revelation in the ancient world, or whether they were merely symbolic adjuncts to spiritual practices. Was the voice of God heard by a prophet or an oracle, a neurochemical event carefully induced by a priestly caste? The cover-up, if it occurred, would be among the most profound. The systematic discrediting of chemically aided revelation by later, more dogmatic faiths that insisted truth could only come through scripture or asceticism, not through a cup of tea. The garden's true purpose, as a factory for direct experience of the divine, was weeded out of history. This leads to the most fringe and unsettling application, the garden as a tool of social control and psychological warfare. Imagine a ruler with a private garden of delirium-inducing datura, or potent psychedelics. An enemy ambassador is served a specially prepared wine. In his ensuing terror-filled vision or confabulatory state, he might reveal secrets or sign a damaging treaty, later believing he had been visited by demons or gods. A rebellious population's water supply could be subtly tainted with ergot, causing mass hysteria and convulsions that could be blamed on divine punishment, justifying a brutal crackdown. The garden becomes an armory of invisible weapons, its use leaving no trace but madness. A cover-up where the weapon and the evidence are the same, a temporary alteration of reality itself. So, the gardens of poison and revelation represent a covered-up branch of ancient science, one that understood the mind as a landscape that could be cultivated, invaded, or expanded. As we saw with the city that sailed away, survival sometimes meant transcendence or escape. Here, transcendence was cultivated in a flower bed. The knowledge of these plants was the power to kill, to cure, or to converse with the divine. Its suppression was not just an attack on herbalism, but on an entire paradigm of knowing that embraced altered states as sources of authority. The walled garden is a metaphor for the mind itself, a place where beautiful and terrifying truths were grown in secrecy, until the gate was locked and the key thrown away, leaving us to wonder if the visions of the ancients were mere superstition, or the fruits of a forgotten harvest. And from the intoxicating, treacherous scent of those hidden gardens, we move to a harder, colder reality. Stone. But not just any stone that has been shaped not only to stand, but to listen, to remember, and to speak. Walls that listened and spoke, architecture with memory of stone. The stone here is not passive. In the deep, corbelled silence of a Neolithic passage, tomb like Newgrange, or in the vast, sun-baked courtyard of the hyperstyle hall at Karnak, the architecture is doing more than enclosing space. It is conducting. A whisper at one end of the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid can be heard clearly at the other, a phenomenon of baffling acoustic precision. A specific footfall in the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza produces a chirping echo, mimicking the sacred Quetzal bird. The wind, sighing through the precisely angled windows of the Incan complex of Sacsayhuaman, creates a low, harmonic hum. This is not accidental. A growing body of research in archaeoacoustics suggests that the ancients engineered stone to hold and manipulate sound, turning their greatest structures into vast, solid-state recording devices, or perhaps transmitters. The cover-up is in our modern, silent view of these ruins. We see them as mute when they were designed to be anything but. The mainstream archaeological fact is the staggering precision of this stonework. The Inca, for instance, fitted multi-ton andesite blocks so perfectly that a razor blade cannot slip between them, a technique that provided incredible seismic stability. But this precision also has acoustic consequences. Tight joins and specific angles can reflect, focus, or filter sound waves. At the oracle chamber in the Hypogeum of Saflieni in Malta, a deep male voice speaking into a small niche is amplified and distorted, reverberating throughout the underground complex with an otherworldly, pervasive quality that feels disembodied and divine. This was almost certainly used in rituals, allowing a hidden priest to become the voice of the earth. But the quirkier mystery lies in the potential for information storage. The concept of lithic resonance exists on the fringes of archaeology and acoustic physics. It posits that certain crystalline structures within stone, when subjected to powerful sound waves under specific conditions, could theoretically undergo subtle, permanent changes in their molecular arrangement, a literal etching of sound into the atomic lattice. If such a technology were understood, even intuitively, a monument could become a library. A ritual chant, a historical proclamation, or a set of laws could be sung into the very walls during construction, with the belief that the stone would hold the vibrational pattern, the memory of the event, forever. The structure becomes a chronicle, but one that requires the correct resonant frequency to read it back, a frequency that might be achieved only by a specific chant, drum beat, or even a solar alignment that heats the stone just so. Scholars still debate whether the acoustic effects in ancient sites are deliberate masterworks of sonic engineering or happy byproducts of architectural forms developed for other reasons: structural stability, astronomical alignment, aesthetic grandeur. The cover-up, if there was one, would be the loss of the oral tradition that held the key. The specific songs, frequencies, or rituals needed to activate the architecture. We are left with a spectacular instrument, but the sheet music has been burned. This leads to the most speculative fringe idea, that some megalithic sites were not just for ritual, but were functional, long-range communication devices. The phenomenon of a low-frequency hum produced by wind over certain structures, like the Great Pyramid in its original polished casing, could have travelled for miles. If modulated perhaps by opening and closing vents or chambers, could it have carried simple, coded information across a kingdom? More esoterically, if consciousness has a vibrational component, as suggested by some ancient philosophies, could these structures have been designed as resonant chambers to harmonize or amplify collective thought, a form of psychic architecture meant to stabilize the mana of a place or a people? The cover-up is the dismissal of this possibility as fantasy, yet the sheer investment of labor to achieve such precision demands a purpose beyond the merely symbolic. So, the walls that listened and spoke challenge our understanding of history as something recorded only on perishable media. As we noted with the Gardens of Poison, the ancients sought to interface with unseen realms. Here, they used stone as the interface. The great monuments are not ruins, they are sleeping archives. The wind that whistles through them today might be playing a fragmented, corrupted version of a song meant to keep the world in balance. The perfect silence we attribute to the deep past may be an illusion. Perhaps the past is not silent at all, but is constantly broadcasting on a frequency we have forgotten how to hear, waiting for someone to once again strike the right note against the ancient stone and listen for a whisper from the foundation of the world. And from this notion of architecture as a collective mind, we are drawn to consider an even more profound unity, not of stone, but of dream. An empire bound together not by law, but by shared vision. The empire of shared dreams, rule through collective vision. Imagine an empire with no need for propaganda, because every citizen, from the capital to the farthest frontier, shares the same dream. Not a metaphor for unity, but a literal, common visionary landscape experienced in the sleep state or in trance, cultivated from childhood through ritual, diet, and sacred plants. This is the fringe hypothesis for the enigmatic Chavin culture of ancient Peru, c. 900–200 BCE. Their archaeological record shows a sudden, widespread, and astonishing uniformity in art, iconography, and religious symbols across a vast and geographically fragmented region of the Andes. How was this achieved without a standing army, without a unified written language? Perhaps through the deliberate, priestly management of consciousness, turning the inner world into the ultimate territory of control, an empire of the mind. The mainstream historical fact of Chavin is its profound cultural influence. The site of Chavin de Huántar, a sprawling temple complex of plazas, terraces, and labyrinthine underground galleries, appears to have been a pilgrimage center of immense power. Its iconography, the snarling, feline mouths, the serpent-headed hair, the transformative figures blending human, avian, and crocodilian traits spreads like a visual virus across pottery, textiles, and stone carvings for hundreds of miles. Archaeologists see this as evidence of a powerful religious cult, a horizon style that unified diverse peoples through shared belief. But the mechanism of this unification remains mysterious. Trade and pilgrimage alone seem insufficient to explain the depth and speed of the cultural adoption. This is where the quirkier, psychotropic evidence enters. Excavations at Chavin de Huántar have uncovered prolific evidence of the San Pedro cactus, Echinopsis pachanoi, a potent source of mescaline. Elaborate ceremonial snuff trays and tubes suggest the use of vilca, Anadenanthera seeds, another powerful psychoactive. The architecture itself seems designed for sensory manipulation. Dark, narrow stone canals channeled underground rivers, creating a constant roaring sound like a jaguar's growl throughout the temple. The galleries are disorienting, with sudden changes in airflow and acoustics. A priest standing at a specific air duct could project his voice to seem like it emanated from a stone idol. The entire complex was a machine for inducing overwhelming, awe-filled, altered states. Scholars still debate whether Chavin was the center of a theocratic state that used psychoactive sacraments to impose its ideology, or a neutral, oracle-based pilgrimage site whose brand of visionary experience became a prestigious cultural currency adopted voluntarily by emerging elites across the region. The cover-up is one of time and conquest. Later cultures, like the Inca, built upon but also buried the Chavin legacy, and the Spanish conquest brutally extinguished the shamanic practices. The how of this dream empire was deliberately destroyed, leaving only the eerie, uniform art as a ghostly imprint of a shared interior world. This leads to the most radical fringe interpretation, that the Chavin priesthood didn't just use psychoactives, but had mastered a form of directed visionary experience. Through a combination of precise botanical blends, controlled sensory environment, sound, darkness, cold, and guided ritual, they could reliably induce specific visionary sequences in initiates the same recurring motifs of felines, serpents, and transformation. This was not mere hallucination, it was a programmed spiritual curriculum. By undergoing this initiation, a pilgrim from a distant valley didn't just learn a doctrine, he experienced the foundational mythos of the culture directly, in a way that was more real to him than waking life. He returned home not with a new political allegiance, but with a new layer of reality indelibly etched into his psyche, which he then reproduced in his local art. The empire was maintained by a network of shared internal experience, not external force. So, the empire of shared dreams presents a cover-up of a different kind of power, the power to colonize the imagination. As we saw with the walls that hold sound, the ancients could encode information in non-literal ways. Here, they encoded an entire worldview in the neurochemistry of their people. The uniformity of the art is not the cause of unity, but the fingerprint of it, the shared report from a commonly visited visionary realm. The state's deepest secrets weren't in a vault. They were in the communal dream, a space where priest and pilgrim met on equal, terrifying, and transformative ground. It suggests that the most binding chains and the most liberating truths are those forged not in steel, but in the shared darkness behind closed eyes. And from this collective realm of inner vision, we descend into a far more tangible and toxic underground geography, a tomb where rivers do not flow with water, but with shimmering, deadly metal. Rivers of mercury and ambition, flowing metal through palace veins. We descend now from the airy realm of shared dreams into the weighty, sealed darkness of a tomb. Not just any tomb, but the greatest unopened burial chamber in the world, the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Above, the grass-covered mound is quiet. Below, according to the Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian, lies a microcosm, a vast underground kingdom with constellations of pearls on the ceiling and replicas of the empire's geography on the floor. And through this geography flow rivers, but not of water. Sima Qian writes, with chilling specificity, of rivers and lakes of mercury, flowing mechanically, simulating the great Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Modern science has confirmed the presence of alarmingly high concentrations of mercury vapor in the soil over the tomb. This is not myth. It is a toxic, terrifying fact. The cover-up is twofold: the tomb itself, a sealed secret, and the true, alchemical purpose of that shimmering, deadly metal. The mainstream historical narrative focuses on Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality and his megalomania. The Terracotta Army we met earlier guards the eastern approach to this central tomb. The mercury rivers are seen as the ultimate symbol of his power, a royal landscape so potent he could command even liquid metal to do his bidding in the afterlife. The mercury, quicksilver, was also associated with Taoist alchemy as a substance that could confer longevity or transcendence. Its use was extravagant, lethal, and psychologically profound, meant to create an eternal, imperishable duplicate of his realm. The state's decision not to excavate, citing preservation concerns and the genuine danger of mercury poisoning, maintains the cover-up, keeping the emperor's final secrets inviolate. But the quirkier, more unsettling question is, how and why would one engineer flowing rivers of mercury? Mercury is heavy, viscous, and volatile. To keep it flowing mechanically for centuries, or even symbolically at the time of burial, would require a staggering feat of hydraulic engineering and airtight chamber construction. Some fringe engineers and chemists have proposed that the rivers might not have been pure mercury, but a composite slurry or a clever visual simulation using other, now solidified metals and reflective surfaces. Yet, the mercury vapor readings suggest a significant quantity of the real thing is present. This pushes the mystery from the symbolic into the realm of a lost and dangerously advanced technological ritual. Scholars still debate whether Sima Qian's account is reliable. History, anti-Qin propaganda, meant to paint the first emperor as a mad, decadent tyrant, or a symbolic description of the tomb's spiritual purpose. The mercury, in alchemical tradition, represented the primal, transformative substance, the prima materia. Its presence could indicate that the tomb was not just a burial chamber, but an active alchemical furnace, a final, grand experiment to trigger the emperor's transfiguration from mortal corpse to immortal deity or cosmic ruler. The sealed tomb, then, is not a closed coffin, but a reaction vessel, its work ongoing for over 2 millennia. This leads to the darkest fringe speculation. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin. In high concentrations, its vapors induce madness, hallucinations, and paralysis. What if the rivers of mercury served a more sinister, practical purpose? They could be the ultimate booby trap, a volatile, poisonous moat designed to kill any grave robbers who breached the inner sanctum. But on a more ritualistic level, what if the mercury was meant not for the emperor's glory, but for his containment? Qin Shi Huang was a figure of unimaginable violence and power, who unified China through brutal conquest. In death, he may have been feared even by his own architects and priests. The mercury, with its associations with both immortality and entrapment, could have been part of a binding ritual, a way to simultaneously preserve his powerful spirit and lock it away forever in a toxic, reflective prison, preventing it from wandering and haunting the dynasty he founded. The tomb is not a palace, it is a sealed reactor core, or a phylactery. So, the rivers of Mercury represent a cover-up of ambitions so vast it crosses into the metaphysical. As we saw with the Empire of Shared Dreams, the ancients sought to manipulate reality itself. Here, a single man sought to sculpt his own eternity, using the most dangerous and mysterious substance his world knew. The mound is silent, but beneath it, according to sensors, something volatile still stirs. It is a reminder that some secrets are buried not just to be hidden, but because they are actively, perilously alive. The tomb is a warning in the form of a hill, and the mercury is its silent, shimmering, poisonous blood, flowing through the dark veins of history, waiting. And from this sealed, toxic mountain, we journey to a solitary, sun-baked cliff face, where a door was built, not for passage, but for a single, final act of closure. Gates that only opened once, portals to deliberate obscurity. The cliff face is sheer, baked by a desert sun, its stone the colour of old bone. Set into it is a door, not a cave mouth, but a deliberate, massive construction of fitted stone blocks, with a grand lintel and a seemingly functional, yet immovable slab. This is the symbolism made literal, a door meant to be passed through only a single time. Examples whisper from across the ancient world. The legendary Door of the Sun at Tiahuanaco, or the false doors in Egyptian mastabas that served as spiritual portals for the Ka. But the most potent example is physical, the concept of the single-use gate in Inca architecture, or in the design of certain royal tombs. This was not an entrance, it was an event. A threshold crossed once, after which the mechanism, be it a counterweighted stone, a sand-filled channel, or a timber brace designed to rot, would irrevocably seal itself. The cover-up is in the very purpose of the door, to create a permanent mystery, to make the act of concealment itself a final, unanswerable statement. The mainstream archaeological interpretation of such features is often ritualistic or practical. The false doors in Egyptian tombs were symbolic gateways for the soul to pass between worlds, not for the living. In Inca sites, perfectly fitted stone plugs that could only be removed from the inside suggest a focus on security from within, perhaps for final, secret ceremonies before a priest's self-entombment. The once-only mechanism is a security device of the highest order. Once the last authorized person passed through and triggered the sealing mechanism, the secret, be it a burial chamber, a treasury, or a sacred cavern, was rendered inaccessible by design. The knowledge of opening it died with the last initiate, but the quirkier, more haunting possibility lies in doors that seem to have no chamber behind them at all. At the site of Hayumaca in Peru, near Lake Titicaca, there is the Puerta de Hayumaca, or Gate of the Gods, a massive, door-like carving in a sheer rock face that leads to solid stone. Local legend says it is a portal to another realm, opened only for heroes in a bygone age and now forever shut. While geologically likely, a natural formation shaped by wind, its uncanny resemblance to a deliberate, sealed portal fuels speculation. What if some doors were never meant to be opened in our dimension? Their function was not to conceal a room, but to mark a boundary, a permanent, architectural, no-entry sign posted on the border of the physically knowable. Scholars still debate whether these single-use gates and false doors represent a profound belief in the absolute separation of realms, living, dead, sacred, profane, or were clever psychological tools. A tomb with a visibly, immovably sealed door is a powerful deterrent to grave robbers. It declares there is no point in trying. More subtly, it creates a permanent focus for ritual and memory. The sealed gate becomes the monument, its impenetrability itself the object of veneration. The cover-up is public and spectacular. It doesn't hide the fact that there is a secret. It flaunts the secret's inviolability. This leads to the most extreme fringe interpretation, that some of these gates were emergency seals. This applies particularly to the precise, fitted stone plugs found in some Andean sites. What if they were designed to contain something, not just protect something? A notion found in global folklore is the sealed evil in a can, a dangerous entity, force, or knowledge physically imprisoned by ancient peoples. The single-use gate is the perfect technology for this. The last shaman or engineer, after coaxing or forcing the danger into its prison, triggers the final, irreversible lock from the outside, or escapes through a one-way mechanism, condemning themselves to exile or death but safeguarding the world. The door's very existence is a warning and a memorial. Its location might be remembered, but the reason for its sealing was deliberately erased from common knowledge to prevent foolish attempts at reopening. So, the gates that only opened once teach us that the ultimate cover-up is not about hiding a thing, but about terminating access to it. As we saw with the Mercury tomb, some secrets are buried because they are too dangerous to be free. Here, the barrier itself is the message. It is a monument to a decision made in a forgotten past, a decision that some knowledge, some place, some power was too volatile to remain in circulation. The door stands as a silent sentinel, a mute guardian of a choice we can no longer understand, its smooth, unyielding face reflecting back only our own curiosity and our profound, unanswerable ignorance of what lies, eternally, just beyond. And as we turn our backs on that sealed and silent portal, we lift our eyes to the sky, not to the sun or the familiar stars, but to a specific, empty patch of darkness, where an ancient observatory waits patiently for an event that has not yet occurred. The observatory without stars, watching what never appeared. The stones here are not a circle, but a sprawl, a complex of pillars, sightlines, and carved channels across a high plateau. This is Göbekli Tepe, in modern Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers, a structure that predates Stonehenge by 6 millennia. Its T-shaped pillars are carved with elaborate, often terrifying, animal forms. Mainstream archaeology has identified possible alignments to the stars, particularly to the constellation Cygnus or Sirius, but there is a more unsettling alignment proposed by some astronomers and fringe researchers. Certain key sightlines at Göbekli Tepe and at other archaic sites like the equally ancient stone circles at Nabta Playa in Egypt seem to point not to bright stars, but to specific, empty regions of the sky. These voids are not random. They are the locations where, due to the slow wobble of Earth's axis, precession, different stars would have been prominent thousands of years earlier, or will become prominent thousands of years in the future. It is as if the builders were commemorating a celestial memory, or anticipating a celestial event, on a timeline that stretches the bounds of human reckoning. The mainstream historical fact of Göbekli Tepe is revolutionary enough. It forces a rewrite of human history, proving that complex, monumental architecture and organized religion likely preceded agriculture and settlement, not the other way around. The effort required to erect these multi-ton pillars implies a sophisticated social structure and a powerful, unifying belief system. The animal carvings, scorpions, vultures, foxes, are interpreted as totemic symbols or elements of a mythic cosmology, but the astronomy adds a layer of chilling precision. To track precession, which moves the stellar backdrop by 1 degree every 72 years, requires observations maintained over generations. It implies a long-term cultural memory and a motive that was not merely practical, like marking seasons, but philosophical, even eschatological. The quirkier mystery lies in the choice of a dark target. Why build a monument to an absence? One fringe theory suggests these sites were built in the wake of a catastrophic, sky-borne event, like a comet swarm or a nearby supernova that etched a specific patch of darkness into cultural memory as a wound in the heavens. The monument then becomes a memorial to that trauma, forever pointing to the now quiet scar. Another, even more speculative idea is that the empty spot is a target for something cyclical but incredibly long period, like the return of a dim companion star to our sun, or the transit of a hypothetical planetary body with an orbit measured in millennia. The observatory is set to wait. Scholars still debate whether these alignments are statistically significant or the result of modern pattern seeking applied to ancient stones. The cover-up, if any, is the erosion of the original purpose. The people of Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried their own temple under thousands of tons of soil around 8000 BCE, preserving it but also hiding it, as if sealing away a knowledge or a duty they no longer wished to maintain. Did they abandon a vigil that had become too long or too terrifying? By burying the pillars, they covered up not just the stones, but the reason for their precise orientation, leaving only the silent, buried sentinels pointing at secrets in the dark. This leads to the most profound fringe interpretation. that these sites are not observatories in the sense of watching for something, but are anchors or markers of something. In certain esoteric traditions, the Earth is understood to have an energetic relationship with specific star systems or galactic features. What if these monuments were built to tune a location on Earth to a particular, slow-moving celestial frequency, to harness or stabilize a cosmic energy flow for the benefit of the biosphere or human consciousness? The empty patch of sky might represent the source of that energy, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable through other means. The burial of the site could then represent a severing of that connection, a deliberate disconnection from a cosmic circuit for reasons lost to time. So, the observatory without stars confronts us with a timescale that dwarfs our history. As we saw with the single-use gates, these ancient peoples made decisions whose consequences were meant to span epochs. Here, they built a clock that ticks not in hours, but in millennia, its hands made of stone, and its face the vault of heaven. It suggests that our ancestors were engaged in a conversation with the cosmos, far more nuanced and long-term than we imagined. They looked up, saw not just lights, but a pattern unfolding with glacial slowness, and built monuments to mark a moment in that grand cycle, a moment that, for us, has not yet come, or passed so long ago we have forgotten it was ever expected. And in that silent, stony watch, there is a patience that feels less like archaeology and more like a message, waiting in the soil and the stars for a time when someone might again understand what it means to watch the dark. And from this patient watch upon the infinite, we drop our gaze back to the earth, to lines etched upon its face so vast they can only be seen from the heavens, paths that lead the eye, but seem to lead the feet of no one, roads made for ghosts, pathways without footstep echoes. The earth here is pale, dry, a parchment stretched taut across the bones of the desert. This is the Nazca Plain in Peru. From the ground, it is a bewildering expanse of gravel and dust, but from above, the perspective granted by modern flight or satellite, the land reveals its secret. Hundreds of straight lines, geometric shapes, and colossal animal figures, the Nazca Lines. The giant hummingbird, the spider, the monkey are famous. But less renowned are the countless straight lines, some over 30 miles long, running flawlessly across hills and valleys, converging at vanishing points on the horizon. They are not roads in any conventional sense. They show no ruts from cart traffic, no scatter of lost goods, no wear from countless feet. They are pristine pathways, etched by the removal of dark surface stones to reveal the lighter soil beneath. They were meant to be seen, but seemingly not walked upon. They are roads for the eyes, or perhaps for something that has no feet at all. The mainstream archaeological interpretation ties these lines to water, the most precious resource in the desert. Many lines lead to or from small, natural water sources, or pukios, ancient aquifers. The theory is that they were ceremonial pathways, walked during rituals to invoke the deities responsible for water and fertility. The animal figures may have represented constellations or clan totems involved in these rites. The line's straightness and persistence demonstrate an incredible ability to survey and execute over long distances, a communal effort for a sacred cause. The cover-up is natural, the purpose faded with the culture, and the Spanish conquest obliterated the living knowledge, leaving only the immense, enigmatic drawings. But a quirkier, more phenomenological mystery endures. Walking the lines, even today, produces a strange effect. The silence of the desert is absolute, the scale distorting. The lines themselves act as visual guides, pulling the gaze and seemingly the mind toward the horizon in a state of focused, almost trance-like, linear contemplation. Some researchers have proposed that the lines were not meant to be walked in a practical sense, but to be followed by the mind's eye during visionary states, induced by rituals or local psychoactive plants like the San Pedro cactus. The pathway on the ground was a physical counterpart to an inner spiritual journey, a map for a shamanic flight of the soul. The roads were not for bodies, but for spirits in transit. Scholars still debate whether the primary function of the lines was hydrological ritual, astronomical calendar, or a form of territorial marker for different clans. The cover-up might be one of misplaced literalism. We look for carts and footprints because we understand roads as utilitarian. But if the lines were a form of symbolic architecture, a prayer written on the landscape itself, then their lack of practical wear is not a mystery, but proof of their true, non-corporeal purpose. They were not covered up. We have simply been reading them with the wrong part of ourselves. This leads to the most speculative fringe idea, one that connects to the observatory without stars. Some proponents of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, though widely dismissed, point to the line's apparent need for an aerial view and their staggering precision. A more grounded, but still radical, alternative suggests the lines were meant as signals or markers for something above, but not extraterrestrial. Could they have been alignments for ancestral spirits believed to reside in the sky or mountains? Or perhaps they were part of a geomancy so vast it sought to channel terrestrial energies along these straight, clean vectors. The converging lines create a sense of forced perspective, as if aiming at a focal point in the sky or the distant hills, a focal point that might have held a shrine, a peak, or a point where the sun stood at a specific solstice. The pathway is the pointer. The journey is not taken, but witnessed. So, the roads made for ghosts challenge our very definition of a road. As we saw with the observatory watching the dark, the Nazca people invested immense labor in projects that served a purpose beyond the immediate physical world. These lines are a testament to the power of the line itself. As a connection, a direction, a prayer, they turn the entire landscape into a temple floor, with paths leading not to an altar, but to an idea. They are covered up by their own simplicity. We stumble over the literal, missing the symbolic. They whisper that the most important journeys might not require movement at all, only a line drawn in the earth, a gaze fixed on the horizon, and a mind willing to travel where the feet cannot follow. And from these vast, silent pathways on the desert floor, our story is pulled downward, into the weight and silence of the deep sea, where another kind of palace waits, one where the courtiers are currents, and the throne room is forever dark. Palaces beneath the waves, thrones, where water was the court. The light here is gone, replaced by the profound, crushing dark of the abyssal plain. The pressure is a physical presence, a weight that would annihilate any human visitor. Yet, sonar and bathymetric maps have begun to sketch the ghosts of grandeur in these impossible depths. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument stirs controversy. Massive, terraced sandstone formations with sharp, right-angled edges, apparent staircases, and what look like carved channels. Near Cuba, sonar imagery reveals symmetrical geometric structures on the seafloor over half a mile down. These are not the shallow, drowned cities like Pavlopetri. These are structures in deep water, places that sank not in historical time, but in the abyss of geological ages, during the meltwater pulses at the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. If they are artificial, they speak of a civilization not just covered up, but drowned by the planet itself, its very existence pushed beyond the fringe of orthodox history. The mainstream geological view is one of natural formation. Yonaguni, most scientists argue, is a spectacular example of sandstone beddings, fracturing, and erosion by strong currents, a natural wonder that fools the eye with its regularity. The Caribbean structures could be remnants of beach rock or other geologies. The cover-up, in this view, is a cognitive one, our pattern-seeking brains imposing order on random natural beauty. Yet, a minority of geologists and archaeologists point to features that resist easy explanation. The placement of supporting pillars at Yonaguni, the perfect 90-degree angles on multiple planes, the alignment of features with cardinal points. The debate is fierce, a battleground between geological gradualists and archaeological catastrophists. But the quirkier, more haunting thought experiment is this. If they are artificial, what kind of civilization builds at sea level in an interglacial period? Knowing, or perhaps not knowing, that the ice is melting, it suggests a people intimately tied to the coast, perhaps maritime to their core, for whom the boundary between land and sea was fluid. Their palaces might have been built on vast, now drowned continental shelves like Sunderland or Doggerland, which were fertile, populated plains during the last glacial maximum. Their architecture would have been adapted to a water-centric life. Perhaps their most sacred spaces were not on hilltops, but at the water's edge, or even built out over lagoons, making them the first structures claimed when the seas rose. The throne room, in this context, might have been a chamber designed to be flooded at high tide, where the ruler literally sat with the power of the ocean as their court. Scholars still debate whether the persistent global myths of a great flood are distant, are collective memories of this rapid, catastrophic post-glacial sea level rise, which would have been a world-altering event for coastal societies. The cover-up is total and environmental. The ocean didn't just hide these sites, it dissolved them, scoured them, buried them under silt, and placed them under thousands of feet of water, putting them effectively on another planet, inaccessible and unprovable. The evidence is not buried, it is subducted. This leads to the most speculative fringe theory, which intertwines with notions of lost, advanced civilizations. If a culture existed before the cataclysm, its technological or spiritual path might have been radically different from our own agrarian, land-based model. Perhaps their advanced knowledge was not of metals and machines, but of hydroengineering, ocean currents, and harnessing tidal or geothermal energy from the oceanic crust. Their palaces might have been power stations, research facilities, or spiritual centers built atop hydrothermal vents, harnessing the planet's inner heat and chemistry. When the seas rose, these sites were not just abandoned, they were encapsulated, preserved in the cold, dark, anaerobic deep sea, like specimens in a jar, their purpose forever frozen and enigmatic. So, the palaces beneath the waves represent the ultimate cover-up, one performed by global climate change. As we saw with the roads for ghosts, some creations are for purposes we can barely grasp. Here, the architecture itself is in a realm we cannot physically inhabit. They are monuments to a possible human, or perhaps pre-human chapter, that was erased not by war or invasion, but by a shifting thermostat on a planetary scale. They force us to consider that history is not just what is buried in the earth we walk on, but what is buried under the sea that surrounds us. A silent, sunken kingdom that may hold the roots of our oldest stories, forever just out of reach, in the lightless court where water is the only ruler. And from this lightless, weighty realm, we ascend back to the world of light and form, to a society that communicated in a language of exquisite, wordless eloquence, a grammar of hands and posture that said everything and nothing all at once. Language of unspoken gestures, communication beyond all words. The light here is the warm, diffused glow bouncing off polished marble floors and painted plaster walls. We are in the palace of Knossos on Crete, amidst the vibrant, swirling art of the Minoan civilization. c. 2000, 1000, 450 BCE. The frescoes are alive with leaping dolphins, lithe bull leapers, and graceful courtiers. But look closer at the human figures. Their hands are not idle. Fingers are extended, curled, or pressed together in specific configurations. A woman holds her thumb and forefinger in a ring. Others gesture with palms open or fingers splayed. This is not artistic whim. Across Minoan art, on seals, in frescoes, on statuettes, these hand gestures repeat with formal consistency. They suggest a sophisticated, non-verbal language, a chironomia or gesture code, that may have been as important as spoken words, perhaps more so in sacred or royal contexts. It is a language without a dictionary, a cover-up of meaning in plain sight, its syntax lost to time. The mainstream archaeological view acknowledges the prominence of gesture in Minoan iconography, often linking it to ritual or ceremonial action. The famous Minoan salute, a fist held to the forehead, is seen as a gesture of adoration or mourning. Others may indicate prayer, offering, or status. Without a deciphered written language, linear A remains unread. These gestures are one of our few windows into their symbolic world. The cover-up is the silence of the artifacts themselves. They show us the code being used, but never provide the key. The meaning evaporated when the last initiate died, leaving only the elegant, silent pantomime. But the quirkier mystery deepens when we consider the possibility that this gestural language was not merely supplemental, but primary for certain types of information. In a culture that may have been matrilineal and theocratic, where the great goddess was central, the most sacred knowledge might have been considered too potent for words. It could only be transmitted through embodied performance, specific dances, postures, and hand signs taught from master to initiate. The art, then, is not just decoration, it is a manual. The frescoes at Knossos might be showing us the vocabulary of this sacred language, frozen in time. The famous Prince of the Lilies fresco, with his commanding outstretched arm and specific hand position, might not be a portrait, but a diagram of a kingly or priestly sign of authority. Scholars still debate whether these gestures are purely ritualistic, a form of symbolic storytelling for a largely illiterate populace, or if they represent a true, formalized sign language used in the palace bureaucracy or in the noisy, crowded ceremonial spaces where spoken words might be lost. The cover-up was catastrophic. The volcanic eruption of Thera and the subsequent Mycenaean invasion shattered Minoan culture. The living tradition of this gestural language was likely suppressed or absorbed, its nuances lost in the cultural shift, leaving behind only the hauntingly beautiful but mute illustrations. This leads to a fringe, cross-cultural speculation. Similar formalized hand gestures, mudras, are central to Hindu and Buddhist practice, each holding specific philosophical and cosmological meaning. Certain Minoan gestures bear a striking, if superficial, resemblance to some mudras. Could this point to a much older, shared system of symbolic gesture stretching back into the Neolithic, a visual lingua franca of the ancient Mediterranean and Near East? If so, the language was not invented by the Minoans, but inherited and refined. Its loss was not just the loss of a Minoan secret, but of a prehistoric channel of communication that used the human body itself as a medium for complex ideas about the universe, a channel later covered over by the dominance of alphabetic writing and spoken dogma. So, the language of unspoken gestures reveals a cover-up of an entire mode of thinking. As we saw with the roads for ghosts, some expressions are meant for a different kind of perception. Here, knowledge was held in the body, in muscle memory, and practiced elegance. It was fluid, performative, and holistic. To understand it, you didn't need to read. You needed to mimic, to embody the meaning. The silent figures on the frescoes are not just art. They are echoes of a conversation that happened in movement and stillness. A conversation that ended abruptly, leaving behind only the poised, silent hands, forever holding the shape of words we can no longer hear or understand. And from this silent, elegant grammar of the body, we turn to an object that defies the most fundamental grammar of the physical world. An object of royal splendor that possessed all the beauty of gold, but none of its weight. Gold that weighed nothing, treasures defying natural law. The setting is a throne room, but one of legend more than archaeology. We are in the realm of chronicles and epic poetry, like the accounts of the kingdom of Prester John, or the tales of the early Merovingian kings. The object is a crown, or a scepter, or perhaps a ceremonial cloak. It is described as being wrought of the purest, most brilliant gold, studded with gems that catch the light like frozen stars. But when a worthy heir lifts it to place upon their head, or when a priest raises it in blessing, a miracle occurs. It is as light as a dried leaf, as insubstantial as a dream. This is not a metaphor for the lightness of responsibility. The texts insist on its physical property. The gold that weighed nothing is a recurring motif in the lore of sacred kingship across continents, a treasure that defied the natural law of mass and gravity, and thus, by extension, proclaimed its wearer or owner as above nature itself. It represents a cover-up not of an object, but of a technology or a state of being that we can no longer comprehend. The mainstream historical view dismisses this as pure literary hyperbole, a symbolic device to express the divine or supernatural nature of royalty. A king's authority is not a burden, therefore his crown is weightless. It is allegory, not metallurgy. The actual crowns we find in archaeological contexts, like the heavy, intricate gold of Scythian chieftains or the Celtic torques, are very much subject to gravity. The cover-up, then, is the modern insistence on reading ancient texts literally, when their purpose was often to convey mystical truth, not physical fact. The weightless gold was a theological statement, buried under our materialist interpretations. But the quirkier, more tantalizing possibility is that these stories preserve a distorted memory of a lost artifice. Could ancient metallurgists have achieved something we cannot? The concept of foamed metal is a modern invention, creating a metal matrix filled with air bubbles, drastically reducing weight while maintaining the appearance. While foamed gold is not known today, the principle is not magic. More esoterically, some alchemical traditions spoke of potable gold, or aurum potabile, a substance that held the spiritual essence of gold without its material heaviness. What if certain royal artisans, through a secret and now lost process of alloying, thin wire construction, or even psychological conditioning, created objects that felt unnaturally light, creating a profound psychological impact on the beholder? The secret of its making would be a state secret of the highest order, a technological cover-up to enhance the mystery of power. Scholars still debate whether such legends originate from a single, ancient cultural source and spread, or arose independently as a common archetype of sacred rule. The cover-up, if it conceals a real artifact, would be absolute. Such an object, if it ever existed, would be the ultimate treasure, likely hidden, destroyed, or disintegrated long ago. Its existence would challenge our understanding of ancient technical prowess, suggesting a peak of material science that was not passed down, perhaps because it was too linked to a specific, defunct priest-king ideology. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which ventures into the realm of metaphysics. In many ancient worldviews, matter and spirit were not separate, a truly sacred object, thoroughly consecrated by ritual and belief, might be perceived to transcend its physical properties. The weight being described might not be gravitational mass, but spiritual density. To the initiated, to the true king, the crown felt light because it was in harmony with his rightful role. To an usurper, it would feel crushingly heavy. The legend, then, is not about physics, but about a subjective, consciousness-influenced reality. The cover-up is the loss of the cosmological framework that made such an experience possible. We no longer believe a crown can be light, so we cannot feel it. Even if such an artifact were placed in our hands, the knowledge lost is not of an alloy, but of a state of mind. So, the gold that weighed nothing sits at the crossroads of symbol, science, and spirit. As we saw with the language of gestures, the ancients often encoded meaning in experiences beyond the literal. Here, the experience of weightlessness was the ultimate symbol of legitimacy, a divine endorsement made tactile. Whether achieved through psychological theatre, forgotten technology, or genuine transcendent experience, it served the same purpose: to separate the ruler from the ruled by a law deeper than gravity. It is a cover-up that challenges us to consider whether our historical senses are too dull, our physics too rigid, to perceive the true nature of the treasures the past insists it once held. And from this elusive, weightless symbol of authority, we turn to a far more oppressive, ubiquitous symbol of power. An emperor whose stone face watched his subjects from every corner of the land, a surveillance state rendered in granite. The king who was everywhere, rule through perfect replication. The face is austere, idealized, and utterly familiar. It stares out from the town square of a provincial capital, from a crossroads in a dusty frontier outpost, from a niche in a bustling river port. It is the face of the Roman Emperor Augustus. Following his rise to power, a remarkable thing happened across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire: a proliferation of identical, or nearly identical, portrait statues. This was not organic admiration. It was a deliberate, state-managed program of image dissemination. Workshops produced standardized models, and local sculptors replicated them with disciplined uniformity. The result was that from Britannia to Syria, subjects knew their emperor's face intimately, a face that never aged, never showed weakness, and was always watching. This was a psychological cover-up of the First Order, the replacement of a mortal, fallible man with an immortal, omnipresent icon. The state covered up the individual to exalt the office, using stone to forge a collective consciousness. The mainstream historical fact of Roman imperial portraiture is well documented. Augustus, learning from the chaotic, individualized portraits of the Republic, established a portrait type, a specific, youthful, authoritative likeness that was copied and distributed as a political tool. It was a branding exercise of genius. The uniformity created a sense of stability and universal order. When you paid taxes or obeyed a decree, you were not serving a distant, unknown man in Rome. You were serving the serene, godlike visage that stood in your own forum. The cover-up was in the artistry itself. It smoothed away wrinkles, perfected proportions, and imposed an eternal calm, hiding the anxieties, illnesses, and aging of the real person. But the quirkier, more chilling dimension emerges in the remote places, in the farthest military garrisons, in towns that would never see a living emperor. The statue was often the only concrete manifestation of imperial power. Rituals were performed before it. Oaths were sworn to it. In a very real sense, that statue was the emperor in that locality. Some fringe archaeological interpretations suggest that certain of these statues, particularly those of deified emperors, were not just representations, but were treated as vessels. Small offerings or written petitions have been found buried at their bases, as if the stone itself could receive prayers. The statue became a functional idol, a permanent, local anchor for the imperial Numan divine spirit. The cover-up was theological, the merging of political authority with religious practice, making dissent not just treason, but sacrilege. Scholars still debate whether this program was primarily about administrative control, cultural Romanization, or the creation of a nascent imperial cult. The psychological impact, however, is undeniable. The omnipresent face created a panopticon effect, the feeling of being perpetually observed by a benign but inescapable authority. It normalized the emperor's power into the very landscape. The cover-up succeeded because it was not hidden, it was flaunted. It didn't erase the emperor's presence, it multiplied it to infinity, making the individual disappear into the archetype. This leads to a speculative, modern parallel that deepens the mystery. The consistency of these portraits, across vast distances without instant communication, implies a system of control that went beyond sending a bust from Rome. It required trained sculptors, approved models, and a cultural enforcement of the correct image. Some researchers see this as an ancient precursor to mass media, a state-controlled broadcast of imagery designed to standardize perception. But what if there was also a subtler, more magical intention? In some ancient philosophies, replication has power. By creating thousands of identical images of the ruler, the state might have been attempting to solidify his reality, to weave his authority into the fabric of the world through sympathetic magic. Each statue was not just a symbol, but a battery storing and radiating imperial power. To damage one was not just vandalism, it was an attack on the metaphysical integrity of the empire itself. So, the king who was everywhere perfected a cover-up of humanity through repetition. As we saw with the weightless gold, the ruler's image was manipulated to transcend the mundane. Here, it was multiplied to achieve ubiquity. The real Augustus, with his coughs and his doubts, was covered up by an army of his own stone faces, a silent, staring militia that conquered the minds of his subjects more thoroughly than any legion. It teaches us that the most effective cover-up can be a surplus of truth, a single truth, repeated so often, so perfectly, that it leaves no room for any other reality to exist. And as we consider that silent, stone-faced surveillance, we turn to a single, flickering point of light that outlasted every emperor, every dynasty, a flame that refused to die. Fire that burned centuries, flames that outlasted civilizations. The light here is not the cold, reflected gleam of stone, but a warm, living, dancing glow. It emanates from a simple source, a natural gas seep, carefully channeled through a clay or stone pipe, burning in a quiet chamber deep within a temple complex. This is the eternal flame, a phenomenon known from antiquity in places like the Temple of Vesta in Rome, the Ateshgah fire temple in Azerbaijan, or the now lost sacred fires of pre-Zoroastrian Persia. Unlike a lamp that needs refilling, this flame fed from the planet itself. It was a miracle-made geology, tended by a rotating priesthood, generation after generation. Its continuity was the ultimate symbol of cosmic order and divine favor. To allow it to go out was an unthinkable omen, a tear in the fabric of reality. This flame represents a cover-up of impermanence itself, a defiant, flickering lie against the entropy of history, asserting that some things, if tended with enough faith, can truly last forever. The mainstream historical and geological fact supports the possibility. Natural gas seeps, where methane and other hydrocarbons escape to the surface, exist in many parts of the world, particularly along tectonic fault lines. Ancient peoples encountering these burning springs would have seen them as profoundly sacred. The engineering feat was in stabilizing and housing the seep, protecting it from wind and rain, creating a permanent shrine around this seemingly immortal fire. The cover-up, when such flames were eventually extinguished, was often religious conquest. The extinguishing of the Vestal flame in Rome in 394 CE by the Christian Emperor Theodosius was not just a political act, it was a metaphysical assassination, a deliberate killing of a 1,000-year-old symbol of Roman state religion to make way for a new cosmic order. But the quirkier mystery lies not in the flame's origin, but in its endurance as a concept. Beyond the geological accidents, many cultures maintained perpetual flames using human effort, the lamp of the Jewish temple, the Greek sacred hearths, the Japanese showman. The fuel might be olive oil, butter, or tallow, but the requirement of constancy was the same. This points to a deep psychological and spiritual imperative, the need for a single, unbroken point of light as an anchor in time. The flame was a clock that measured not hours, but the lifespan of cultures. Its tenders were timekeepers of the soul. The knowledge they guarded was not how to find the gas seep, but the intricate liturgy of maintenance, the rituals of renewal, the unbroken chain of whispered prayers that formed the true, invisible fuel. Scholars still debate whether the primary purpose of these eternal flames was religious, a direct conduit to the divine, political, a symbol of the state's enduring legitimacy, or practical, a reliable source of fire for a community before matches. The cover-up occurs when the flame goes out, and the reason for its significance is forgotten, leaving only a legend of a light that never dies, which seems like fantasy until you stand before a natural gas fire that has, indeed, burned for millennia. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, drawn from alchemy and esoteric tradition. In these schools, fire is not just an element, but a living intelligence, a transformative entity. An eternal flame, carefully tended and ritually educated over centuries, could be seen as accruing consciousness, becoming a repository of the prayers, visions, and intentions of every priest who ever tended it. It would become an oracular entity, its flickers read for messages, its very presence a stabilizing force in the local spiritual ecology. The cover-up, when such a flame is snuffed, is the murder of that accumulated entity. The secret knowledge lost is that fire can be more than a chemical reaction. It can be a partner, a witness, and a keeper of time on a scale that dwarfs human lifetimes. So, the fire that burned centuries is a cover-up of fragility. It stands as a testament to the human will to create permanence in an impermanent world. As we saw with the Everywhere King made of stone, it is an attempt to freeze a moment of divine connection into eternity. But where the statues are static, the flame is alive. It breathes, consumes, and dances. It required not just initial creation, but perpetual, devoted attention. It is a cover-up that demands complicity. Its eternity is a pact between the earth that fuels it and the people who vow to tend it. When the last tender turns away, the cover-up is revealed. The eternity was conditional, a beautiful, fragile story told in light and heat, waiting for a wind, or an emperor's decree to blow it out and return the world to darkness. And as we contemplate that solitary, unwavering point of light in the long night of history, we turn to a different kind of doorway, one that promises passage, but opens only onto solid wall, a threshold to nowhere. Doors without rooms, entrances, leading only to themselves. The door is magnificent. It is framed by carved stone jambs, topped with an intricate lintel depicting serpents or gods. It has a threshold you could step over, but it is set into a solid, unyielding wall of masonry. This is a false door, a feature found from the mastaba tombs of Old Kingdom Egypt to the ceremonial complexes of the ancient Andes. It does not lead to a chamber, a treasury, or a secret passage. Its entire purpose is to be a door that cannot be used by the living. It is a monument to transition itself, a cover-up that hides nothing but the very concept of passage, rendering it pure symbol. It speaks to an ancient understanding that the most important thresholds are not physical, but metaphysical. The mainstream archaeological interpretation is well established, particularly in Egypt. The false door, falsa porta, in a tomb, was the interface between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It was through this symbolic portal that the ka spirit of the deceased could pass to receive offerings left by the living. The door was functional, but its function was spiritual. It covered up the finality of death by providing a designated, architecturally grand point of contact. In the Andes, similar niches or door-like structures in ritual walls, huancas, might have served as altars or portals for offerings to the earth or the ancestors. The cover-up is one of translation. We see a useless architectural folly. They saw a vital conduit. But the quirkier mystery arises when these doors appear in places not directly associated with burial. In certain megalithic structures or palace walls, a false door might face a sacred direction toward a mountain peak, the rising sun on a solstice, or the flow of a river. This suggests its purpose was not just for spirits, but for aligning and directing energy or attention. The door frames a view, not an entrance. It turns the landscape itself into the room beyond. The act of standing before it, of focusing through its frame, was the ritual. The door was a tool for perspectival magic, forcing a specific, sacred alignment of the observer's gaze and, by extension, their intention. The cover-up is in our modern search for utility. We look for the room behind the door, missing that the door's purpose was to redefine the space in front of it. Scholars still debate whether the proliferation of false doors in certain cultures represents a rigid, formalized religious orthodoxy or a much more fluid, symbolic language where architecture itself became a text to be read by initiates. The knowledge lost is the precise ritual grammar what one was supposed to do in front of this non-entrance. Was it to pray, to meditate, to leave an offering in the niche? Or was it simply to stand and contemplate the immutable barrier, as a lesson on the limits of the physical world and the necessity of spiritual passage? This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, that some false doors were not false at all, but functional under specific, non-corporeal conditions. Drawing from concepts in quantum physics or multidimensional string theory, as anachronistic as that is, some have proposed these doors were considered operational during altered states of consciousness, during specific astrological alignments, or for entities of a different vibrational state. The door is only false to our ordinary perception. In a shamanic trance, or during a sacred ceremony, the priest might perceive the door as open, leading to a spiritual realm. The solid stone is the cover-up for the uninitiated. For the seer, it is a veil. The knowledge lost is the method to change one's state of perception to walk through. So, the doors without rooms are a cover-up of the obvious. They declare, in stone, that the most profound passages leave no physical trace. As we saw with the eternal flame, some ancient truths required constant, ritual attention to remain real. Here, the threshold itself is the object of veneration. It teaches that a barrier can be as meaningful as a passageway, that the act of marking a limit is itself a creative, sacred act. It covers up the chaos of the unknown with the order of a frame, giving the infinite a shape, a handle, a name, even if that name is simply door, and it opens onto the solid, beautiful, and eternal wall of mystery. And from this contemplation of symbolic thresholds, we turn to a different kind of reflective surface, one that does not show the viewer their own face, but a vision of somewhere else, someone else, somewhen else. Mirrors that showed elsewhere, reflections of other realities. The surface is not glass, but polished obsidian, a volcanic glass forged in the earth's fury, cooled into a deep, liquid black. Or it is a disc of bronze, burnished to a high, shimmering sheen. This is not a tool for vanity. It is an instrument of vision. In the hands of an Aztec Tezcatl priest, a Mayan Arkin seer, or a Eurasian shaman, this mirror was a gateway. Gazing into its depthless reflection under the influence of sacred plants, fasting, or rhythmic chant, the seer did not see their own features. Instead, the surface clouded, swirled, and resolved into scenes of distant battles, of hidden truths, of futures yet to unfold, or of the spirit world. These scrying mirrors were believed to reveal objective reality beyond the senses. They represent a cover-up of the nature of perception itself, asserting that truth could be found not by looking out, but by looking in, into a manipulated reflection that became a window. The mainstream archaeological fact is the widespread discovery of such mirrors in ritual contexts. The Maya used polished pyrite mosaics to create dazzling, composite mirrors. The elite burials of Mesoamerica and China often included polished bronze or obsidian discs placed near the head or chest, presumably for use in the afterlife. John Dee, the 16th century English astrologer and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, used a polished obsidian mirror for angelic communication. The cover-up, in the modern era, is the dismissal of these objects as superstitious trinkets or mere status symbols, ignoring their central role in the decision-making and cosmological understanding of entire civilizations. But the quirkier, more psychological mystery lies in the phenomenon itself. Scrying is a form of controlled pareidolia, where the mind projects images onto an ambiguous surface. In a state of sensory deprivation or altered consciousness, the brain's pattern-making machinery runs free. The ancient seers, however, did not believe they were imagining. They believed the mirror was showing. This points to a different epistemology, where the boundary between internal vision and external reality was porous. The mirror was a technology to focus and legitimize this liminal perception. The knowledge lost is not how to polish stone, but how to enter the specific trance state that transformed the mirror from a rock into a reliable tool of statecraft and oracle. Scholars still debate whether the use of these mirrors was purely psychological, a form of guided intuition or divination, or if there was a perceived spiritual technology at work. Did they believe the mirror's polished surface literally captured and reflected spiritual energies or distant events, like a television screen tuned to a non-physical frequency? The cover-up of their true function may have been internal to the priesthood itself. The methods for achieving the trance, the interpretation of the visions, were likely closely guarded secrets, creating a monopoly on access to elsewhere. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, one that touches on modern theoretical physics. Obsidian, being a glass, has a non-crystalline, chaotic atomic structure. Some speculative thinkers have proposed that such amorphous solids, under certain conditions, could theoretically act as receptors for quantum information or non-local phenomena, a notion firmly in the realm of pseudoscience but fascinating as a thought experiment. More poetically, the mirror's function might be understood as symbolic of consciousness itself, a reflective surface that can, under the right conditions, contain a world that is not literally there. The ancients, by staring into the void of a polished stone, were perhaps exploring the void of their own consciousness and calling the landscapes they found there real. The cover-up is our insistence on a material reality. They may have been accessing a different, but equally valid, phenomenological one. So, the mirrors that showed elsewhere are a cover-up of the source of knowledge. They externalized the inner eye. As we saw with the doors to nowhere, the ancients used physical objects to navigate non-physical spaces. Here, the mirror becomes a trap for the unseen, a pool to catch reflections from dimensions beyond light. It asserts that every surface is potentially a membrane, and every quiet mind, a viewer. The secret they held was not in the composition of the bronze or the obsidian, but in the agreement between the seer and the stone, an agreement that the deepest truths are not observed but revealed, and that sometimes, to see clearly, you must look at a perfect, polished, dark, and wait for it to show you a light from somewhere else entirely. And as we step back from the depths of that visionary glass, we are confronted with a bureaucracy that took this inner world seriously enough to count it, to categorize it, to attempt to govern the ungovernable landscape of the human heart and mind. The census of shadows, counting what left no trace. The medium here is not stone or glass, but clay, baked into small, palm-sized tablets. They are administrative records, like those found in the ruins of Mesopotamian cities, or the palace archives of the Minoans. Most list the mundane: so many bushels of grain, so many head of cattle, so many jars of oil. But among them, archaeologists occasionally find fragments that defy this logic. One, from the site of Mari in ancient Syria, might not list sheep, but instances of favourable bird omens observed in the city quarter of. Another, a linear B tablet from Knossos, could baffle with an entry not for chariot wheels, but for nights of unbroken temple silence. A Hittite text might enumerate not soldiers, but dreams of the king involving eagles. This is the census of shadows, the attempt by ancient bureaucracies to quantify, record, and thus exert control over the intangible. Luck, divine favour, mental states, and portents. It is a cover-up of chaos, an audacious effort to file the unpredictable in a ledger. The mainstream scholarly view often interprets these tablets within a framework of religious or omen-based statecraft. In Mesopotamia, the liver of a sacrificed sheep, extispecie, was read like a text, and the results, favourable or unfavourable, were recorded to guide royal decisions. Dreams were considered messages from the gods and were reported to the palace. The census was a way of tracking the divine mood, of managing the metaphysical economy as carefully as the material one. The cover-up is in our secular dismissal. We see primitive superstition, where they saw the collection of vital intelligence from the realm of the gods. But the quirkier, more profound mystery lies in the act of recording itself. By writing down that the south wind brought no ill sounds for 7 nights, or that 3 merchants reported visions of overflowing wells, the bureaucracy was performing a kind of magic. It was transforming fleeting, subjective experiences into objective, archived data. It gave shadows a number, making them manageable, discussable, and actionable in court politics. This suggests a worldview where the intangible was not less real than the tangible, but simply another category of resource to be monitored and administered. The king's scribes were logging the weather of the soul. Scholars still debate how literally these records were used. Was a province taxed based on its yield of good omens? Was a general promoted because his dreams were more frequently victorious? Or were these tablets merely the annotated journals of priestly observers used to identify patterns over time, an ancient form of statistical analysis applied to the supernatural? The cover-up is the loss of the interpretive key. We have the data points, 17 size of the Earth God, but not the formula for what they meant or how they factored into state calculus. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, that these censuses were part of a grand and ultimately futile human project to impose order on a fundamentally chaotic universe. By naming, numbering, and filing even the most ephemeral events, the state was trying to weave a net of meaning so fine it could catch fate itself. It was a psychological defense against a capricious world. The shadows counted dreams, omens, strange sounds, were the leaks in reality, the places where the unknown bled into the known. The bureaucracy's response was not to seal the leak, but to measure its flow. In this light, the census of shadows is not quaint, but deeply existential. The record of a civilization trying to take the minutes of a meeting between humanity and the incomprehensible. So, the census of shadows reveals a cover-up of anxiety through administration. As we saw with the mirrors that showed elsewhere, the ancients sought to bring the unseen into the realm of the seen. Here, they went further. They sought to file it. It represents the ultimate faith in the power of the written word, not just to record history, but to pin down the butterfly wings of chance and dream. It is a poignant, monumental effort to make the wind reportable, to make the dream accountable, to make the silence of the gods just another column in a spreadsheet of empire. And in its broken, baked clay fragments, we find not just records, but the ghost of a hope that if you could only count everything, you might finally control it all. And from this silent, clay tablet attempt to govern the invisible, we are swept into a story of creation through sound of mountains not built, but sung into their impossible shapes. Music that shaped mountains. Harmonies carving stone. The sound here is not a melody, but a deep, sustained drone, a note so low and powerful it is felt in the bones before it is heard by the ears. We are in a place like the Marchandise Canyon in Turkey, or the ringing rocks of Pennsylvania, or the ancient quarries of Baalbek in Lebanon. Local legend, passed down through generations, often dismissed as folklore, insists that these places were not shaped by crude tools alone. The story goes that the master builders, the ones who moved the impossible stones, knew the song of the rock. By using massive horns, giant tuning forks, or simply a chorus of voices raised in a specific resonant frequency, they could cause the stone to quiver, to soften, to become malleable. Then, with minimal effort, blocks could be parted from the living bedrock as easily as slicing butter. This is the legend of sonic levitation and acoustic liquefaction, a cover-up of a lost physics, where music was not entertainment, but the most advanced engineering tool imaginable. The mainstream geological and archaeological view is, of course, one of immense human labor, leverage, ramps, and patience. The multi-hundred-ton stones at Baalbek were quarried and moved, using wooden sledges, rollers, and thousands of workers. The peculiar resonant properties of certain rocks are natural phenomena. The ringing rocks are a lithological curiosity. The cover-up, in the academic sense, is the dismissal of the folk memory as a metaphorical explanation for feats the common people could not otherwise comprehend. The song was the rhythm of work chants, not a literal sonic technology, but the quirkier, scientific mystery lingers. Acoustic resonance is a powerful force. Modern experiments have shown that specific, high-intensity sound waves can indeed cause sand or fine particles to form into ordered patterns, cymatics, and can levitate small objects in an anti-gravity field. While scaling this up to multi-ton blocks defies our current engineering, the principle is not magic. Could ancient cultures have stumbled upon a harmonic principle that amplified sound in a specific, localized way, perhaps using the natural amphitheater of a canyon or specially constructed resonance chambers? The knowledge would have been the most precious secret of the state, a sonic key that unlocked stone. Its loss would constitute a cover-up of monumental proportions, not by conspiracy, but by the fragility of oral tradition and the catastrophic collapse of the civilizations that held it. Scholars still debate whether the persistent global myths of stones being moved by song or spell, found in Inca, Celtic and Egyptian lore, represent a corrupted memory of work songs that coordinated labour, or if they hint at a genuine, forgotten empirical discovery about the resonant properties of certain types of stone under specific conditions. The cover-up is the gap between the legend's simplicity and the overwhelming physical evidence of the stones themselves. We see the end product and assume the process must have been brutish, because our science says it must be. The legend suggests another path, now overgrown. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which merges with spirituality. In many ancient cosmologies, the world was sung into existence. Creation was an act of sound. Therefore, to shape the world, to cut stone, was not to assault it, but to persuade it, to find the frequency at which it was willing to cooperate. The master builder was not an engineer, but a composer, a priest of vibration. The quarry was an orchestra, and each stone had its own note. The knowledge lost was not a technical manual, but a sacred songline, a vibrational map of the material world. To know the song of the mountain was to be in harmony with it, and in that state of harmony, the separation between will and stone could dissolve. The cover-up, then, is our modern, adversarial relationship with matter. We force, they asked, and the mountains, according to the story, answered. So, the music that shaped mountains is a cover-up of a potential dialogue between humanity and the mineral world. As we saw with the census of shadows, the ancients sought to integrate the intangible into their systems. Here, they may have attempted to converse with the very fabric of the tangible. The legends refuse to die because they speak to a deep human intuition, that the universe is vibrational, and that harmony, in its purest physical form, might be a key to unlocking its secrets. The silent, monumental stones stand as the ultimate test of this idea. They neither confirm nor deny it. They simply are a permanent, deafening chord in the symphony of history, leaving us to wonder if their silence is all there is, or if we have simply forgotten how to listen for the song that placed them there. And from this reverberant mystery of stone and sound, we turn to a quieter, more subtle art, the craft of an ink that held its own secret, a writing that remembered, and then chose to forget. Ink that remembered, writing that changed after reading. The medium here is parchment or papyrus, smoothed and ready. The ink is not simple soot and gum. It is a careful alchemy, gallnut tannins, iron salts, perhaps a whisper of gum, Arabic, but also other, rarer ingredients. The pulverized lens of a certain fish that sees in the dark, a minute measure of a radioactive mineral that decays at a known rate, the distilled essence of a flower that opens only at midnight. This is an ink of intention. It is used to inscribe a secret treaty, a heretical doctrine, or a royal confession. The writing is clear, dark, and urgent. But then, the clockwork within the ink begins its silent work. Over days, or months, or years, the words do not simply fade, they transform. The iron oxidizes, shifting from black to a dull, permanent brown, but in a pattern that forms new, decoy words. The radioactive particles degrade, subtly altering the chemical bonds. The special compounds react slowly with the air. The original message disappears, but in its place, a different text appears, a bland inventory, a pious prayer, a love poem. The true message was a temporal phantom, visible only to the intended reader within a narrow window of time. After that, the secret covered itself up. The mainstream historical fact is the enduring mystery of fading and disappearing inks, known from antiquity. Lemon juice or milk, used as invisible ink, is a simple example. More sophisticated recipes using plant saps or chemical reactions that appear upon heating were used for espionage. But the concept of an ink that actively rearranges into a plausible decoy is the stuff of legend, like the apocryphal, sympathetic ink of medieval grimoires. The cover-up, in practice, was more often achieved by simply destroying the document. Yet, the persistence of the idea in alchemical and cryptographic texts suggests it was a grail of secret keepers, the perfect, self-executing cover-up. But the quirkier, more plausible mystery lies in natural processes that could be harnessed. Certain iron gall inks are notorious for degrading over centuries, sometimes burning through the parchment, but in the short term, their color change can be dramatic and uneven. A skilled forger, or an original scribe with malicious intent, could theoretically formulate an ink that would degrade in a predictable pattern, creating the illusion of different letters or words, as certain strokes faded faster than others. The decoy message would be crude, but to a casual observer centuries later, it might be accepted as the original text. The knowledge lost is the precise recipe and timing, turning each such document into a unique, unsolvable puzzle, where the solution has literally evaporated. Scholars still debate whether any surviving ancient texts show evidence of such deliberate chemical obfuscation, or if all perceived changes are the result of random decay and later palimpsests, where text was scraped off and written over. The cover-up, if it existed, would be nearly perfect. A successful ink that remembered would leave no trace of its original secret, only a mundane document that historians would file away without a second thought. The greatest secrets may not be in lost libraries, but in plain sight scrolls we have already catalogued, their true meaning having vanished in a chemical sigh long before we learn to read their language. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which ventures into the magical. In some esoteric traditions, words have power. A true name, a potent spell, or a dangerous prophecy could not be allowed to exist indefinitely in a static form. The ink was designed to hold the power only long enough for it to be transferred to the mind of the initiate, after which the physical vessel had to be neutralized to prevent misuse. The ink didn't just hide the message. It released its energy upon being read and then self-destructed, returning to harmless nonsense. The knowledge wasn't in the recipe, but in the understanding of words as living, volatile entities that required containment. The cover-up was a sacred duty, a way to let knowledge breathe once and then bury itself. So, the ink that remembered represents a cover-up that is an act of temporal artistry. As we saw with the music that shaped stone, it involves a deep understanding of material properties and time. Here, time is the co-conspirator. It doesn't just hide the secret. It performs an alchemical transformation on it, leaving a believable lie in its wake. It challenges the permanence we ascribe to the written word. In a world of digital data that can be deleted in an instant, this ancient idea feels strangely prescient. The most secure secret is one that knows how to die, and to leave a convincing double in its coffin. It suggests that in the shadows of history, the very documents we trust as fixed records may have been involved in a slow, silent dance of appearance and disappearance, a dance whose final pose we mistake for the beginning. And from this ephemeral, self-erasing script, we lift our eyes to a monument of stunning permanence, yet one dedicated to a seemingly empty core, a temple whose most sacred space holds nothing but air, and the towering pillars that hold up the sky. Pillars supporting empty sky, architecture of absent gods. The space here is vast, open to the elements. We stand in the central courtyard of the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, or perhaps within the ruined temenos of a vast Hellenistic complex. The architecture is staggering in its scale. Monolithic pillars, each hewn from a single piece of stone, rise like giants to impossible heights. They are arranged in colonnades, holding up nothing. Or rather, they hold up the sky itself. There is no roof. The most sacred space, the cellar or inner chamber, where the cult statue would normally reside, is either absent or open to the heavens. This is architecture that venerates an absence. It was built not to house a graven image, but to frame a void, to create a monumental landing pad for a deity conceived of as an invisible, pervasive presence, a god of storms, of the sky, of the sun, whose true form was the expanse itself. This is a cover-up of the divine, in its most profound form, using the most solid, permanent materials humans could muster to delineate the permanent, immaterial presence of the intangible. The mainstream archaeological interpretation ties such hypaethral, open-air temples to specific cults. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek was dedicated to a sky god. The open plan allowed for sacrifices whose smoke would rise directly to heaven. The Parthenon, though roofed, housed a colossal statue of Athena, but its exterior proportions were designed to be viewed under the open sky, a celebration of celestial light and ratio. The cover-up is contextual. Later religions that demanded enclosed, image-filled spaces could not comprehend worship focused on an empty center, and so reinterpreted or neglected these sites, allowing their original purpose to be obscured by time and new mythologies. But the quirkier, more philosophical mystery lies in the psychological impact of the design. Standing amidst these towering pillars, that support only air creates a profound feeling of exposure and connection. The architecture does not shelter you from the divine, it exposes you to it. It says, the God is not in a man-made idol, but in the sun that beats down, the rain that falls, the wind that whistles through the colonnades. The immense labour of erecting these stones was an act of humility, a way of saying, our greatest engineering feat is merely a frame for your immensity. The knowledge encoded here is not of quarrying, but of theology, how to build a house for a concept that has no shape. Scholars still debate whether the shift from open-air shrines and pillar cults, like the earlier Canaanite Masboth, to roofed temples with anthropomorphic statues represents a progress in religious thought, a domestication of the divine, or a loss of a more direct, awe-filled connection to the natural world as manifest deity. The cover-up might have been this very transition. The empty, sky-held space was too wild, too unpredictable. Enclosing the god in a room with a statue made it manageable, negotiable. The pillars that held up the sky were covered over by a roof, and the infinite was traded for the finite. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which intersects with archaeoastronomy and geomancy. The alignment of these open colonnades is often precise. They might frame the sunrise on a solstice, or align with a particular star. The empty space they define is not truly empty. It is a volume calibrated to capture a specific celestial event or terrestrial energy. The pillars act as gun sights for the cosmos. The deity was not the sky in general, but the event, the moment of equinoctial light flooding the courtyard, or the star that gleamed exactly down the central axis once a year. The worship was of a moment of perfect alignment between heaven and earth, and the temple was the instrument that measured it. The cover-up is our failure to see the temple as an active observatory and trigger for a time-based experience, rather than a static house for a static god. So, the pillars supporting empty sky are a cover-up of a god who refused to be pictured. As we saw with the ink that erased itself, this ancient knowledge embraced ephemerality and transformation. Here, the sacred was the ever-changing sky, and the temple was its permanent, earthly counterpoint. The greatest mystery is not how they lifted the stones, but why they bothered to lift them to hold up nothing. The answer lies in a reverence for the void, an understanding that the most powerful presence can be an absence, and that sometimes the most eloquent architecture is merely a brace for infinity, a gesture in stone pointing to the fact that the true sanctuary has no walls, and its icon is the moving light between the pillars. And from this open-air temple to the formless divine, we are taken to a structure that seems a monumental error of planning a grand harbour engineered to perfection, waiting for ships in a sea of dust. The harbour without water, port for invisible ships. The structure is one of undeniable purpose and precision. A stone quay, its edges worn smooth by imagined tides. Massive bollards for tying ropes that never frayed. Sloping ramps meant for hauling vessels that left no keel marks. But it sits in the heart of a desert, or on a high plateau miles from any significant river or ancient shoreline. This is no error. This is the harbour without water, found in places like the arid interior of Egypt, or high in the Andes, or on the dry plains of Mesopotamia. It is a monument to a journey that was never geographical. The ships it welcomed were not of wood and sail, but of soul and star. This harbour was a terminal for metaphorical, spiritual, or funerary voyages, a cover-up of the final journey by giving it the architecture of a worldly departure. The mainstream archaeological interpretation often links these structures to ritual. The most famous example might be the so-called Valley Temple of the Bent Pyramid at Dashur, Egypt, which includes a causeway and a docking station connected to the Nile by a now-vanished canal. This was part of the funerary landscape, where the deceased pharaoh's body, arriving by barge, would begin its symbolic journey to the afterlife. The harbour was the interface between the land of the living, the Nile, and the land of the dead, the pyramid. In the Andes, certain Ushnu platforms in dry regions might have served as symbolic anchors for cosmic travel. The cover-up is the erosion of the symbolic language. We see a useless dock. They saw a charged portal where one mode of existence transferred to another. But the quirkier mystery arises when these harbours are found in places with no conceivable link to even a ceremonial waterway. Here, the metaphor becomes absolute. The harbour is not just symbolic. It is functional for a different physics. Some researchers of archaeoastronomy note that certain of these dry harbours are aligned with celestial phenomena, the Milky Way, often viewed as a river of stars or a path for souls in many cultures, or with the setting point of specific constellations associated with boats in mythology, like the Egyptian Mesektet Barke of Ra. The stone quay becomes a terrestrial counterpart to a celestial dock. The ships were stellar or spiritual, and the harbour was their scheduled stop on the great circuit of the cosmos. Scholars still debate whether these structures were primarily funerary, designed for a one-way journey, or were used in recurring rituals, where initiates would symbolically embark on visionary journeys, using the architecture as a stage for psychodrama. The knowledge lost is the ritual script. What ceremonies were performed on that dry dock? Were offerings made as if for a long voyage? Were there chants mimicking the calls of sailors? The harbour's silent stones are the fossilized remains of a profound performance, its meaning evaporated like the water that was never there. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which connects to the idea of earth energies or ley lines. Some proponents of this view suggest that these harbours are not pointing to water or stars, but are located at nodes of telluric energy. The ships were not vessels, but currents of this terrestrial force. The harbour was built to dock or harness this energy, to make it available for ritual or healing purposes. The straight causeways leading to them might be conduits. In this reading, the harbour is a technology for interfacing with the invisible flows of the planet itself. The cover-up is our modern blindness to such concepts. We see a failed practical project, where they saw a successful spiritual one. So, the harbour without water is a cover-up of destination. It masks the end point of life's journey with the architecture of another beginning. As we saw with the pillars holding up the sky, it uses the grammar of the practical, a harbour, a dock, to express the metaphysical, a journey of the soul. It speaks to a universal human intuition, that death or transcendence is not an end, but a voyage. And if it is a voyage, it requires a port. And so they built one, with perfect seams and sturdy bollards. In the surest material they had stone, and left it waiting in the dust. For the fleet that would never come on any sea we could see, but might, on a starry night, or in the final breath, seem to glide silently in, to take on its invisible cargo, and depart. And from this silent, expectant dock, we turn to a mechanism of finality, a lock that could only be sealed from within, a security system where the last act was to make the secret forever inaccessible, even to its keeper. Locks without keys, security through forgetting. The mechanism is inside, hidden within the thickness of a stone door blocking a tomb or a treasury. It is a bar, a bolt, a clever arrangement of weights and levers. It can be engaged easily from the interior, a simple pull, a push of a stone counterweight. But from the outside, the door is smooth. There is no keyhole, no latch, no handle. The only way to open it was from within. And the last person inside, after performing the final rites or securing the last treasure, would throw that bolt or trigger that mechanism. Then, they would either remain inside, joining the dead, or guarding the horde in eternity, or they would depart through a separate, one-way passage designed to close behind them. The lock engages, and with that act, the knowledge of how to open the door from the outside ceases to exist. It is the ultimate security, not a secret key, but the eradication of the very concept of entry. The cover-up is the lock itself, a permanent monument to a decision to terminate access. The mainstream archaeological evidence for such mechanisms is debated but plausible. In some Egyptian tombs, there are grooves for internal sliding bars that could be dropped into place from the inside as the last worker exited via a narrow, concealed shaft that was then plugged from the outside. The jamming loop, in certain megalithic structures, where a stone is slid into a position that cannot be reversed without breaking the door, functions on a similar principle. The security was not in complexity, but in irreversible action. The cover-up was part of the design brief. Make it so that not even we, the builders, can change our minds. But the quirkier, more psychological mystery is the state of mind of that last person. Were they a dutiful priest, solemnly performing the final act of sealing their pharaoh's eternity, knowing it was their last living deed? Were they a sacrificial victim, entombed with the treasure as both guardian and offering? Or were they a master craftsman, the only one who knew the secret of the lock's bypass, taking that knowledge to their grave as the final, uncompensated masterpiece of their career? The lock, without a key, is a contract written in stone, signed with a final action. It represents a culture that valued the permanence of the secret over the convenience of future access, even for themselves. Scholars still debate how common such truly irreversible locks were, versus those that merely appeared sealed but had hidden external releases known only to a priesthood. The cover-up's success hinges on the extinguishing of that priestly line. When the last initiate died without passing on the secret of the external release, the lock effectively became without a key, regardless of its original design. History is full of such accidental perfections of secrecy. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which views these locks not as security devices, but as ritual enactments. The act of throwing the final bolt from the inside was not just practical, it was the culminating moment of a ceremony. It was the physical expression of a metaphysical truth, that some realms are meant to be entered once, and then left behind forever. The door was not locked to keep thieves out. It was locked to signify the absolute closure of a chapter, the end of a covenant, the finality of a transition from one state of being to another. The treasure inside might have been knowledge or an experience so potent that it was considered dangerous for it to ever circulate again. The lock ensured the experience remained singular, historic, and contained. The cover-up was for the protection of the world outside. So, locks without keys are a cover-up, enacted through commitment. As we saw with the harbour for invisible ships, they deal in final passages. Here, the passage is closed behind, with absolute finality. They teach that the strongest lock is not the one with the most complex key, but the one where the key is an action, and that action is designed to be its own end. It turns security into a suicide pact with the future, a declaration that some things are more important than access, even for the heirs of those who created them. The silent, seamless face of the door is the face of that decision. A blank, unreadable wall that says the conversation is over, the book is closed, and the only one who ever knew the combination has become, themselves, a part of the secret. And from this profoundly closed door, we look into a palace where the windows offer no escape, only a deeper view into a meticulously controlled inner world, a gaze turned perpetually inward. Windows facing inward. Views of internal universes. The light here is borrowed, reflected. We are in the heart of a labyrinthine palace, perhaps Knossos again, or the citadel of an Assyrian king. The chamber is opulent, but it has no windows looking out upon the kingdom, the streets, the distant mountains. Instead, its walls are pierced with false windows or elaborate niches. These openings do not frame the outside world. They look onto interior courtyards, lush with painted gardens, or onto stunning frescoes of idealized landscapes, hunting scenes, tranquil rivers, mythic beasts. Even when they open onto a real courtyard, the view is carefully composed. A single tree, a statue, a still pool. The ruler's gaze is engineered to turn inward, upon a perfected, miniature reality of their own making. This is architecture as narcissism and control, a cover-up of the chaotic, unpredictable external world by replacing it with a curated, silent imitation. The mainstream archaeological interpretation recognizes this as a feature of palatial security and climate control. Fewer external windows meant better defense and cooler interiors in hot climates. The interior courts provided light and air. The art served as decoration and propaganda, but the psychological effect is undeniable. A ruler who spends their days in rooms where every vista is man-made, whether painted plaster or a curated garden, inhabits a bubble of their own power. The state's narrative becomes the only landscape. The cover-up is of reality itself, substituted with a flattering, controlled fiction. The king is not hiding from the world, he is hiding the world from himself. But the quirkier mystery lies in the potential for these inward views to become tools of trance or meditation. In certain Eastern traditions, meditation chambers are deliberately plain, with a single, small window framing a simple, natural view to focus the mind. Here, the principle is inverted but analogous. The repetitive, perfect, and symbolic imagery viewed through these false windows, the same frescoes, the same courtyard scene, day after day, could induce a state of focused contemplation on the ideas they represented. Power, order, dominion over nature. The window becomes a screen for ideological reinforcement. The knowledge encoded is not of the outside world, but of the desired state of the ruler's mind, a state of belief in the absolute reality of the palace's manufactured world. Scholars still debate whether this inward-facing design was a deliberate psychological strategy by architects and advisors to isolate and magnify the ruler's sense of divine omnipotence, or simply an emergent property of defensive architecture that then acquired a symbolic life of its own. The cover-up's success is measured by the ruler's insulation. Reports from the outside world, famine, rebellion, invasion, would have to penetrate this buffer of perfect imagery, perhaps making them seem less real, less urgent, mere rumors against the solid truth of the painted paradise on the walls. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, that some of these inward views, particularly the painted landscapes, were not mere decoration, but functional maps or diagrams of a spiritual or cosmological order. A fresco of a sacred river might represent the path of the soul. A scene of a mastered beast might symbolize the ruler's control over chaotic forces. The false window framing it turns it into a living chart, a permanent instruction manual for kingship. To look out was to see problems. To look in was to see solutions, encoded in art. The ruler was meant to learn the geography of power from these walls, not from the unruly hills beyond them. The cover-up, then, is our view of these as mere art. They were, perhaps, the core curriculum. So, windows facing inward represent a cover-up of the external in favor of the internal model. As we saw with locks without keys, it is about creating an irrevocable condition here, a conditioned perception. The palace becomes a camera obscura, projecting a controlled, inverted image of the world onto its interior walls, and the king lives inside the projection. It is a powerful metaphor for the echo chamber of absolute power, and a warning of what happens when the windows of perception are built to face only the mirrors of ideology. The outside world does not cease to exist. It merely ceases to be relevant to the person who matters most, until the day it comes crashing through the painted walls in a form that no false window can frame or deny. And from this sealed, self-referential world, we are thrust into a conception of time that is linear, urgent, and hurtling toward a definitive, calculated end. A calendar that does not cycle, but counts down. The calendar of last days, time measured toward endings. The measure here is not the cyclical turn of seasons, the reliable rebirth of the sun after solstice, or the lunar pull of tides. It is a line, stretching from a sacred point in the past to a specific, prophesied date in the future. This is the linear, eschatological calendar. The Maya long count is the most famous example, a vast cycle that began on a mythological date of creation and completed a 5,125-year period on December 21, 2012, a date that sparked global fascination and fear. For the Maya, this wasn't necessarily an end in a cataclysmic sense, but the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. Yet, the very existence of such a long-term, linear count reveals a mindset that saw time as a journey with a destination, not an endless wheel. It is a cover-up of time's true, chaotic nature, imposing a narrative of purposeful progression toward a climax. The mainstream historical understanding of the Maya calendar is sophisticated. They used multiple, interlocking cycles: the 260-day Tzolk'in, sacred round, the 365-day Hab, vague year, and the long count for historical and mythological time. The completion of a Baktun, a cycle of about 394 years, was a time of renewal and potential transformation, not destruction. The 2012 phenomenon was largely a modern Western misinterpretation, yet the cover-up lies in our own projection. We took their complex, cyclical view and flattened it into our own linear, apocalyptic narrative, covering up the nuanced Maya philosophy with our own fears. But the quirkier, more universal mystery is why cultures develop linear, end-date calendars at all. Beyond the Maya, Zoroastrianism posits a final renovation of the universe. Norse mythology has Ragnarok. Christianity has the apocalypse. A linear countdown provides a powerful organizing principle for a society. It creates urgency, meaning, and a shared destiny. It can justify present sacrifices for a future culmination. The knowledge held by the priesthood, the precise calculations, the prophetic interpretations, is a form of tremendous power. Controlling the timeline is controlling the collective anxiety and hope of a people. Scholars still debate whether such calendars genuinely reflect a belief in an inevitable, preordained finale, or are primarily political and social tools used to regulate behavior, unify populations, and legitimize ruling elites who claim to mediate between the people and the impending transformation. The cover-up might be the conflation of mythic time with historical time. The end date may have always been a symbolic marker for a spiritual transition, which later, less sophisticated generations, or outsiders, misinterpreted as a physical event. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, which suggests that some ancient calendars encoding end dates were not prophetic, but anamnesic they were remembering. What if the zero date of a long count calendar doesn't mark a creation, but a previous, catastrophic reset? The calendar, then, is a count-up from the last great collapse, a measure of how long it has been since the world was nearly wiped clean. The end date is simply the point where the count reaches another round number, a time to be vigilant for signs of another cyclical collapse, not its certain arrival. The knowledge lost is the memory of the original catastrophe. Only the counting mechanism remains, a ghost of a trauma so vast it structured time itself around its anniversary. So, the calendar of last days is a cover-up of time's ambiguity. As we saw with the windows facing inward, it is about replacing a complex, potentially threatening reality, the formless march of time, with a controlled, narrative-driven model. It turns the terror of the unknown future into a story with a plot, characters, and a conclusion. Whether that conclusion is renewal or doom, it provides a shape. The great cover-up is that time may have no shape at all, that our sun may simply burn out one day in a silent, indifferent cosmos. The ancient calendar makers, in their profound need for meaning, may have built the greatest cover story of all, that the universe is on a schedule, and that our lives and our deaths are part of its intentional, ticking clock. And from this grand, ticking clock of destiny, we step into a garden where the very rules of growth are inverted, where life performs a strange backward dance to the tune of a different philosophy. Gardens that grew backward, nature reversing its course. The garden is walled, a geometric paradise within a royal or monastic enclosure. But its order is of a deeply unsettling kind. Here, trees are cultivated not for sturdy, youthful growth, but to appear ancient and gnarled from the moment they are saplings. Techniques of binding, pruning, and grafting, the art of penjing, or its precursors, force the plant into a miniature portrait of venerable age. Flowers are bred not to burst from bud to full bloom, but to be maintained in a state of exquisite, perpetual wilting, or even to be trained to open from a faded state back to vibrant colour. This is a garden that philosophically rejects the arrow of time. It does not celebrate spring's renewal, but autumn's wisdom. Not birth, but the beauty of decay. It is a cover-up of nature's forward momentum, an attempt to curate entropy itself, to make the process of aging the highest aesthetic ideal. The mainstream historical fact is the ancient Chinese art of penjing, the precursor to Japanese bonsai, and the similarly ancient art of topiary from the Roman world. These were profound exercises in control and symbolism. A dwarfed tree represented endurance, resilience, and the harmony between humanity and nature. The twisted forms echoed the shapes of dragons or aged scholars. The garden was a three-dimensional painting, its theme often drawn from philosophy or poetry. The cover-up is in the labour intensity. The viewer sees a natural-looking, ancient, miniature landscape, not the decades of daily intervention, the hidden wires, the strategic pruning that created the illusion of timeless struggle and stability. But the quirkier mystery lies in the psychological and cosmological statement being made. A garden that grows backward is a direct challenge to the Western ideal of progress and vitality. It embraces a worldview where the highest state is not at the beginning, but at the end of a process. The perfect tree is not the tallest and straightest, but the one that best embodies the story of surviving wind, time, and hardship. The garden becomes a museum of arrested decay, a celebration of the beauty found in weathering. The knowledge required is not just horticultural, but metaphysical, an understanding that to truly master nature, one must not make it more productive, but more eloquent in its expression of time's passage. Scholars still debate whether these gardens were primarily philosophical demonstrations, status symbols displaying the owner's control over even time itself, or had a deeper, meditative purpose. Sitting in such a garden, surrounded by plants performing a slow reverse alchemy from death back toward life, or eternally poised at the moment of richest decay, could induce a state of contemplation on the cyclical nature of existence, on the illusion of growth, and on the peace that comes from accepting, even beautifying, the inevitable decline. The cover-up is the illusion of stasis. Beneath the surface, roots are digging, sap is flowing, but all is directed toward the appearance of perfect, permanent senescence. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, inspired by alchemical and Taoist principles. In alchemy, the goal is the opus contra natura, the work against nature, to reverse the processes of decay and achieve incorruptibility. The backward-growing garden could be seen as a large-scale, living allegory of this opus. By forcing nature to grow old prematurely, or to reverse its blooming cycle, the gardener was performing a sympathetic magic, practicing the art of reversal on a scale they could control, as training for the ultimate reversal, the conquest of death itself. The garden was not a decoration, but a laboratory, and its twisted, ancient-looking saplings were successful experiments in temporal manipulation. The secret knowledge was the gardener's recipe for convincing a living thing to tell a lie about its own age, a lie so convincing it became a higher truth. So, the gardens that grew backward are a cover-up of time's arrow, using life to mimic antiquity. As we saw with the calendar of last days, they impose a human narrative on a natural process. Here, the narrative is one of elegant decline. They teach that control can be expressed not only by making things bigger and more bountiful, but by making them smaller, older, and more poignant. They hide the vigorous, forward-thrusting life of the plant behind a mask of contemplative age, creating a space where the mind can wander among endings that have been crafted to be more beautiful than any beginning. It is a quiet, green rebellion against the tyranny of newness, a cover story where the hero is not youth, but the graceful, artfully constructed ghost of youth, preserved in leaf and bark. And from this philosophical rebellion in the garden, we turn to the ultimate symbol of authority, reimagined not as a weighty burden, but as a fragile, transient consensus, a crown with no substance. Crowns of absent weight, rule without substance. The object here rests not on a velvet pillow in a treasury, but in the collective memory of a people. It is a crown, but not of gold, platinum, or jewels. Chroniclers and bards speak of a conqueror, perhaps a steppe-lord like Attila, or a unifying chieftain from the misty edges of history, whose paramount symbol of authority was a simple circlet woven from dried grass, reeds, or perhaps willow withes. It was crafted fresh for each coronation, or perhaps existed in a single, fragile original. It possessed no intrinsic value. Its power derived entirely from what it represented, the consent of the governed, the fragile agreement that made one man first among equals. To wear it was to feel its tangible fragility, a constant, tactile reminder that sovereignty was as light, as renewable, and as easily broken as the dried stalks from which it was made. This crown is a cover-up of power's true nature. It hides the iron fist inside a glove of straw, or perhaps it reveals that the fist itself is an illusion. The mainstream historical view searches in vain for archaeological evidence of such a perishable crown. It likely exists in the realm of allegory or later romanticization. Real crowns, from the earliest diadems of Ur to the imperial regalia of Rome, were heavy with precious materials, designed to display wealth, divine association, and permanence. The crown of absent weight seems a contradiction, yet the persistence of the motif is telling. It appears in legends of the Scythians, in tales of early Germanic kings, in the lore of the Mongols. It represents an ideal of kingship that is contractual, nomadic, and fluid power as service, not possession. The cover-up is performed by later, settled empires that replaced this ideal with the theology of the heavy, divine, right crown, burying the older, more fragile concept of authority under layers of gold and dogma. But the quirkier, more profound mystery is the psychological and political technology such a crown represents. A heavy gold crown imposes its authority through physical weight and dazzling splendor. A grass crown invites its authority. It says, "My power is the air you breathe, the agreement you renew each day. I cannot force you. You must choose to see this circle as binding." It is the ultimate exercise in soft power. The knowledge it embodies is not of metallurgy, but of social psychology. How to make a people crown you in their minds, every day, with a wreath of their own making. The crown's fragility is its strength. Its need for constant renewal is its permanence. Scholars still debate whether such crowns ever literally existed, or if they are purely literary devices invented by later historians to critique the decadent, heavy crowns of their own contemporaries, hearkening back to a purer, more virtuous age. The cover-up, then, is the deliberate creation of a nostalgic myth to mask the inevitable corruptions of centralized power. But even as a myth, it holds a potent secret, that the most stable throne might be the one that is acknowledged to be made of reeds, swaying with the will of the people, rather than forged of immutable iron. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, inspired by sacred king rituals. In some archaic initiation rites, the candidate is crowned with a perishable material: leaves, flowers, grass that is ritually burned or cast away after the ceremony, symbolizing the death of his old self and the fleeting nature of worldly honor. The crown of absent weight could be the external symbol of this inner transformation. The true king is not the one who wears a heavy crown, but the one who has internalized the lesson of the grass crown, that his role is temporary, sacred, and light as a breath, a duty to be carried, not a treasure to be owned. The secret knowledge is the ritual that makes a man able to wear nothing and be everything. The cover-up is the later fixation on the glittering object, which distracts from the invisible, weightless state of grace that was the crown's original meaning. So, the crowns of absent weight are a cover-up of power's materialism. As we saw with the gardens growing backward, they champion an idea that inverts common values. Here, true authority is stripped of all weight, all substance, until it is almost nothing, a whisper of consensus, a circle of dead grass. It suggests that the greatest rulers understood that their throne was an idea, and that ideas, however fragile, can outlast empires of stone and gold. They hid their strength in apparent weakness, and their permanence in a symbol of utter transience, leaving us to wonder if the heaviest crowns in our museums are, in fact, the empty ones, and the lightest, the ones that truly ruled. And from this delicate, symbolic circle of rule, we come to the final paradox of connection, a bridge built not to unite, but to forever symbolize the unbridgeable gap it pretends to span. The bridge that was never crossed. Connection without meeting. The chasm is deep, a raw tear in the landscape between two rival city-states, perhaps in the fractured highlands of ancient Greece or the warring valleys of the Caucasus. A treaty is signed, sworn to by gods and ancestors. As part of the peace, a magnificent bridge is to be built, a symbol of the new connection. Stone piers are sunk into the cliffs on both sides. Arches are painstakingly raised from each bank, reaching with stone fingers toward the center. But there, in the middle, where the spans should meet, the engineers do not complete the connection. Instead, they leave a gap. The final section is built not of stone, but of painted wood, or perhaps a fragile lattice of ropes, a symbolic link that is visibly incomplete, that cannot bear any weight. It is a bridge that is, and is not. It represents a promise of connection, forever kept at a deliberate, ceremonial distance. It is a cover-up of enduring hostility with the architecture of peace, a monument to the agreement to disagree, eternally. The mainstream archaeological record holds no certain example of such a deliberately unfinished bridge, but the concept is rooted in political reality. The Roman Pons Sublicius, for instance, was built of wood so it could be easily destroyed if the city was attacked from the far side, a bridge with built-in divorce terms. More symbolically, many ancient treaties established neutral, demilitarized zones, a geographic gap between powers. The bridge that was never crossed is the architectural crystallization of this concept. The cover-up is the illusion of union. The bridge says, "We are connected," while its intentional flaw whispers, "But not that connected." But the quirkier, more profound mystery is the psychological genius of such a structure. A complete bridge invites traffic, intermingling, and ultimately, the erosion of difference. A missing bridge maintains total separation, which can breed suspicion and war. This bridge, however, with its intentional visible gap, does something else. It makes the separation part of the agreement. It turns the chasm into a shared artifact, a co-owned monument to the space between them. Each side can point to it and say, "We built this peace together," while the void at its heart forever reminds them of the reason the peace was necessary. It manages hostility by giving it a defined, respected, and beautifully framed place. Scholars still debate whether such literal structures existed, or if the idea is purely metaphorical, describing the fragile, formalized relations of diplomacy, where embassies act as the painted wooden span, a channel for communication that is always provisional and carries no real weight of integration. The cover-up, in a geopolitical sense, is the constant presentation of diplomacy as building bridges, when the true art may often lie in carefully designing and maintaining the gap, the buffer zone, the diplomatic silence, the agreed-upon disagreement. This leads to the most speculative fringe interpretation, drawn from sacred geometry and cosmology. In some traditions, a bridge symbolizes the difficult path to enlightenment or unity with the divine. It is often described as narrower than a razor's edge. The unfinished bridge, with its impossible central span, could represent the ultimate truth that the final gap cannot be closed by human effort alone. It requires a leap of faith, a moment of grace, or a divine intervention. Built at a border, it might signify that the true connection between peoples is not physical, but spiritual, and exists in a realm that human hands cannot construct. The gap is not a flaw, but the most important part, the acknowledgement of the mystery that truly connects all things, which can be pointed to, but not built upon. So, the bridge that was never crossed is a cover-up of finality. As we saw with the crown of grass, it embraces fragility as a design principle. It is a monument to a relationship defined by its limits. It teaches that sometimes the most enduring connection is one that acknowledges the void at its center, that makes the distance between sides the very cornerstone of its architecture. It is a pact made visible, and its most honest feature is the empty space where the stone fails to meet, leaving the final step to the imagination, to faith, or to a future that the builders, in their wisdom, knew might never come. And now, from this profound and unresolved gap, we approach the final secret, the ultimate library, the last cover-up, a place where the seeker of knowledge does not simply read, but is irrevocably read by and changed. Books that read the reader, knowledge that consumed its seekers. This is not a library of scrolls, but a labyrinth. The air is thick with the scent of aged papyrus, rare inks, and something else, a faint, sweet, metallic tang. The books here are not passive. Their pages are treated with subtle, hallucinogenic dyes that absorb through the fingertips. Their intricate, hypnotic illustrations are designed using sacred geometry to induce trance. Some codices have delicate, embedded mechanisms, tiny, weight-driven wheels of brass, or clever folds that, when manipulated in sequence, release a puff of odorless, psychoactive powder. To engage with these texts is to enter into a dialogue where the book is an active participant. It assesses your focus, your resilience, your very intent. The knowledge within does not yield itself to casual perusal. It demands a price, the permanent alteration of the seeker's mind. You do not walk away with information. You walk away as a different person, the old self consumed in the process of understanding. This is the final, most intimate cover-up, the truth that rewrites the seeker, ensuring the knowledge never exists independently of a transformed vessel. The mainstream historical fact touches on the guarded nature of mystery cults and initiatory knowledge, from the Eleusinian mysteries to the Gnostic schools. The content of the teachings was so potent it was forbidden to write it down, or if written, was encoded in allegory. The cover-up was of the experience itself, which could not be transmitted second-hand. The book that reads you is the ultimate expression of this, a text that acts as a programmed experience, a machine for enlightenment or madness. While no such physical library has been found, the concept is the logical endpoint of the ancient world's most esoteric strains of thought, where knowledge was not data but a state of being. But the quirkier, more terrifying mystery is the potential technology behind it. We know of ancient inks compounded from toxic minerals. We know of bindings using glues from psychoactive plants. We know of labyrinths and dark chambers used for sensory deprivation. Combine these with a priesthood that understood psychopharmacology and psychology as a single science, and the creation of such active books is not impossible. They would be the pinnacle of a sacred technology, where the medium was literally the message and the messenger. The knowledge wasn't in the symbols. The symbols were the trigger for an internal, chemical, and spiritual event that produced the knowledge within the initiate. The book was a key that changed the lock. Scholars still debate whether such intense, transformative secrecy was necessary to protect dangerous truths about consciousness, the cosmos, or power. from the unprepared, or if it was primarily a tool of social control, creating an insurmountable gap between the illuminated elite and the masses. The cover-up is absolute because the evidence is subjective and perishable. The changed minds of the initiates, who could never fully explain what happened to them, only that they were not the same. The library, if destroyed, leaves no trace of its core function. This leads to the final, all-encompassing speculative interpretation that this is not about one library, but about the nature of history itself. Perhaps every great mystery we have encountered, the silent cities, the phantom islands, the observatories to the dark, the self-erasing ink, are all fragments of this ultimate principle. They are all books left by the past that read us. We approach them with our modern minds, our theories, our science, and in the process of trying to decipher them, they change us. They force us to question our timelines, our capabilities, our understanding of reality. The cover-up is not a malicious hiding, but a transformative filter. The past did not bury its secrets to keep them away from us. It buried them in such a way that only by becoming different people, by shedding our assumptions, our arrogance, our temporal provincialism, could we ever hope to find them. The search itself is the initiation. The truth is not a fact to be uncovered, but a state of understanding to be earned at the cost of the person you were when you began. So, the books that read the reader are the metaphor for our entire journey. As we saw with the bridge that was never crossed, the final connection is not completed by the builder, but by the traveller who dares the gap. Here, the final truth is not found by the reader, but in the transformation wrought upon the reader by the search. The ancient world's greatest cover-up may be this, that the secrets were never meant to be simply known. They were meant to be lived, to be become, and in that becoming, the seeker and the secret become one, and the cover-up dissolves, not because the mystery is solved, but because the solver has finally grown to meet it. Conclusion. The night wind that began our journey in the ashes of Alexandria now seems to have blown through every corridor of this long, whispered narrative. It has stirred the dust in empty Indus courtyards, hummed across the strings of the bridge that was never crossed, and now sighs through the imagined stacks of that final, transformative library. We have wandered through cover-ups of stone and spirit, of ink and intention. We have seen secrets buried by water, by ice, by earth, and by the deliberate, collective act of forgetting. We have encountered truths hidden not in darkness, but in plain sight in the gesture of a hand, the line on a desert, the gap in a bridge. These are not merely puzzles to be solved. They are echoes of a human conversation with time, with the cosmos, and with the boundaries of their own understanding. Each cover-up, from the grandest to the most intimate, was a statement. Some things are too powerful, too dangerous, or too sacred to be left in the common current of history. Perhaps, in the end, the calm we sought in this bedtime documentary is not the calm of answers, but the calm of perspective. These ancient silences remind us that our own time is but a layer in a deep stratigraphy of human wonder and fear. Our certainties will one day be someone else's mysteries. Our monuments may become someone else's observatories without stars. So let the final image be not of a solved riddle, but of a single steady flame like the ones that burned for centuries. It casts just enough light to see the outlines of the great, silent questions standing around us in the dark. It does not reveal their faces, but it assures us they are there. And in that gentle, flickering light, there is a profound and peaceful truth. The mystery is not a void to be filled, but a companion for the long night of history. A companion that asks, in a voice as deep as time and as soft as this final breath of narrative, not, "What do you know?" but, "Who have you become, now that you have listened?"